water, earth, air, fire. Long ago, the four nations lived in harmony. Then everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. And then we got one of the greatest series of all time. Avatar: The Last Airbender stands out as one of Nickelodeon's most critically acclaimed shows, becoming the highest-rated animated television series at the time of its premiere. Running from 2005 to 2008, the show's writing and production have stood the test of time, resulting in a live-action movie in 2010 and a highly anticipated live-action reboot that is currently in production. The Avatar's destiny is to save the world and restore peace through vigorous training and self-discipline. All you have to do to reach your destiny is to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on our next great adventure. It's time to head to the South Pole, so sit back, relax, and put on a sweater because it's about to get chilly. The series begins with the boy in the iceberg. While Sokka and Katara are out fishing, Katara practices her very weak waterbending abilities to an unimpressed Sokka.
It's waterbending, and it's—
Yeah, an ancient art unique to our culture, blah, blah, blah.
Suddenly, they get caught in a strong current, and they try their best to get out safely. However, their small fishing boat is crushed by large chunks of ice, and they begin arguing and blaming each other. As Katara becomes more and more upset, her emotions cause the water around her to become turbulent and break a giant glacier. A large iceberg emerges, revealing a small figure and a giant animal trapped in the middle. Katara attempts to free them, and the iceberg cracks and opens, shooting a powerful beam of light into the sky, which is seen by Zuko, the prince of the Fire Nation, who has been searching for the Avatar, and his gentle uncle Iroh.
Why don't you enjoy a cup of calming jasmine tea?
Zuko demands their boat set course to the source of the light, determined to finally catch his prey and regain his honor. Meanwhile, the disoriented child from the iceberg introduces himself as Aang, and his giant flying bison as Appa.
This is Appa, my flying bison.
Right, and this is Katara, my flying sister.
And Katara quickly realizes that Aang is an airbender. He offers to take Katara and Sokka home since they have no boat, and Katara excitedly agrees.
Why are you smiling at me like that?
I was smiling?
After they leave, the Fire Nation boat arrives at the empty scene, and Zuko remains determined to find him. As the group is headed back to the Water Tribe, Katara asks Aang if he knew the Avatar who has been missing for 100 years. Aang replies that he never knew him personally, but he knew people who did. He falls asleep and has a vivid dream of him and Appa becoming trapped in the iceberg. He wakes up suddenly to Katara explaining that they're in the Ice Tribe's village and urges him to wake up so that she can introduce him. When Aang questions why everyone is looking at him strangely, Katara's grandmother, Gran, explains that airbenders have been extinct for about 100 years. Katara explains her excitement in finding another bender to her grandmother, relaying her hopes that Aang could possibly teach her how to become a waterbender.
I sense he's filled with much wisdom. See?
Zuko continues his search while practicing fighting drills over and over to confront the Avatar, convinced that someone who has 100 years of training would be a strong opponent. Aang's childish nature and attitude rubs Sokka the wrong way, causing him to become slightly resentful of Aang. Sokka exclaims that there is no time for fun and games during the war, and Katara approaches Aang and asks for his help in learning how to become a waterbender. Aang reveals he doesn't know how, but suggests going to the North Pole to find the other water tribe, and offers his help to get her there to find a master.
I haven't done this since I was a kid. You still are a kid.
While Katara thinks on the offer, the two explore and stumble upon an abandoned Fire Navy ship that was left from a conflict between the Fire Nation and the Water Tribe that is forbidden to go into. Aang urges Katara to explore it with him, and she begrudgingly accepts. While they're looking around, Katara explains about the Fire Nation's attacks, and they realize that Aang must have been trapped in the iceberg for at least 100 years, since he has no knowledge of the ongoing war, the extinction of the airbenders, or anything after it.
What? That's impossible. Do I look like a 112-year-old man to you?
As they go to leave the ship, they trigger a booby trap that sets off a flare from the ship into the sky. They escape the ship, but not without being seen by Zuko, who now sees what Aang looks like, and that he's staying with the Water Tribe, thus beginning the greatest game of cat and mouse the world has ever seen.
Wake my uncle! Tell him I found the Avatar.
Next is the Avatar Returns. Katara and Aang return from exploring and are greeted by an angry Sokka and Water Tribe. Sokka, convinced Aang is working with the Fire Nation, accuses him of being a traitor and purposefully signaling the Fire Nation and banishes him from the Water Tribe.
We can't fight firebenders with fun.
You should try it sometime.
Get out of our village.
Katara tries to object, but Gran Gran agrees that Aang should leave, and chastises Katara for going on the ship, even though she knew it was forbidden. Aang agrees to leave, and Katara sadly watches as her one chance of learning waterbending walks away.
Wow. I haven't cleaned my room in 100 years. Not looking forward to that.
As Aang and Appa hide out nearby, they see a Fire Nation ship approaching the Water Tribe. The tribe tries to get everyone to safety as the Fire Navy descends on their land. Zuko and his lackeys appear, demanding the tribe reveal the man that they're hiding. Sokka tries to fight Zuko, but it becomes apparent that he's obviously outmatched. Aang swoops in to save Sokka and battle the Fire Navy. Zuko voices his confusion on Aang's age and his abilities, stating that the Avatar is the master of all the elements. Sokka and Katara realize that maybe Aang is the missing Avatar after all. Aang begins to fight, but quickly stops and makes an agreement with Zuko that he'll come to the Fire Nation if they leave the people of the Water Tribe alone. They agree, and they take Aang hostage on the ship. After Aang is gone, Katara sternly demands Sokka that they must save him, and Sokka surprisingly agrees. Gran Gran supports their journey, thanking them for finding the Avatar and giving her hope again. Meanwhile, on the Fire Navy ship, Aang begins to fight for his escape. Katara and Sokka try to get Appa to fly, but nothing they say seems to work. After saying random words, Sokka finally says the magic phrase yip yip, and they begin to fly through the air.
He's flying! Katara, he's...
Aang continues to beat most of the Fire Navy's men, but comes face to face in a battle with Zuko. He manages to retrieve his staff and nearly escape the ship, but Zuko manages to drag him back down on the deck. They both spot Appa flying overhead, and Aang tries to get to him but is pushed overboard by Zuko. In the water, Aang's eyes and arrows begin to glow, and he suddenly starts waterbending and fighting with a ferocity unlike anything he had before. After taking down everyone on the ship, he flops to the ground, and Katara and Sokka swoop down to save them. As they fly away, Zuko and Iroh try to shoot them down with fire, but Aang counters it with a strong gust of wind and sends the fire crashing into the glacial wall and causing it to crumble onto the Fire Navy ship. As the group flies away, Katara asks why Aang never told him that he's the Avatar, and he reveals that he never wanted to be something that was forced on him. Katara urges him of his importance and how he can finally put a stop to the war by learning how to master all of the elements. Realizing he must learn waterbending first, they head to the North Pole so they can learn together. And Sokka is just happy that he can possibly use his warrior skills to fight some Fire Nation people.
Here, we'll ride the hopping llamas. Then way over here, we'll surf on the backs of giant koi fish.
Next up is the Southern Air Temple. Before heading to the North Pole, Aang takes the gang to visit his childhood home, the Southern Air Temple.
Sokka, wake up! There's a prickle snake in your sleeping bag!
Meanwhile, Zuko attempts to repair his ship as quickly as possible so he doesn't lose the Avatar's location. They pull into a harbor owned by Captain Zhao, a fiercely loyal Fire Nation captain, who inquires about their ship's damage. In order to prevent word of the Avatar being back from spreading, Zuko and Iroh lie about what caused the damage. Zhao invites them to join him for a drink, and Iroh accepts through Zuko's objections.
It was incredible. What, did we crash or something?
Yes.
As the group approaches the Southern Air Temple, Katara begins to warn Aang about the Fire Nation's attacks on airbenders, attempting to prepare him for any of the horrors that they might see. Aang brushes her off, confident that the airbenders were not wiped out, but escaped and went into hiding. They arrive and begin to look around.
We're home, buddy. We're home.
Captain Zhao tells Zuko about his father's plans to take over the Earth Kingdom, and Zuko seems doubtful. Zhao then asks Zuko about his attempts to find the Avatar, and Zuko lies, saying he hasn't found anything yet. Sensing his dishonesty, Zhao urges Zuko to tell the truth, but Zuko remains uncooperative and quickly gets up to leave with his uncle. Zhao's men block them from leaving and reveal that they had interviewed Zuko's crew, who admitted that they had the Avatar in their possession.
How exactly was your ship damaged?
As the gang explores the air temple, Aang begins to feel saddened at how much everything has changed over the years. So Sokka tries to get his mind off of it by playing a game of airball.
Aang 7, Sokka 0.
Afterwards, Katara and Sokka find a helmet belonging to a Fire Nation soldier, and they quickly hide it from Aang. Aang shows them a statue of his mentor, Monk Gyatso, who took Aang under his wing and cared and prepared him to become the next Avatar. While reminiscing, Aang remembered Monk Gyatso saying that when he's ready, Aang should go to the Air Sanctuary to meet someone who will guide him on his journey, so he sets off to do so.
2, 3.
Zhao continues to interrogate Zuko about the Avatar and reveals he will be pursuing him now since Zuko was unable to keep him in custody. Aang enters the sanctuary and finds statues of all the past Avatars.
Who is that?
That's Avatar Roku, the Avatar before me.
As they're looking at the statues, a lemur enters the sanctuary, and Aang and Sokka chase after it. Zhao gathers a search party and tells Zuko that once he leaves, he and Iroh will be free to go. Enraged at Zhao's disrespect, Zuko challenges him to an Agni Kai, a fire-bending duel. After chasing it all over the temple, Aang loses the lemur in a room, but finds skeletons of many Fire Nation soldiers surrounding someone else, who he realizes was Monk Gyatso.
Hey, Aang, you find my dinner yet?
Overwhelmed with this loss, Aang begins to break down, causing his Avatar powers to activate, also lighting up many temples, symbolizing the Avatar's return. Sokka and Katara try to talk Aang down before his powers become completely out of control. Meanwhile, Zuko and Zhao begin their Agni Kai. Zuko fights hard and defeats Zhao, but delivers a warning instead of a final blow, sparing Zhao. Zhao tries to deal a blow to Zuko, but Iroh stops it and shames Zhao for his disgraceful loss. As Zuko and Iroh leave, the two bond over Iroh's high regard of Zuko and his honor. As Aang is still overcome with intense emotions, Katara sympathizes with his hurt and loss, and explains that even though the Airbenders are gone, Aang still has a family with her and Sokka. Aang calms down.
I really am the last Airbender.
As they go to leave, the lemur returns to them, and Aang vows to keep them in order to preserve the last living creature of the Air Temple, and he names him Momo. If anyone knows where I can get one of these lemurs for myself, let me know. I'm in the market for a lifelong companion. In the Warriors of Koshi, Aang takes the group on another detour to show them how to ride the giant elephant koi fish. However, once he's in the waters, a larger, much more dangerous fish emerges, and he frantically runs back to shore, where all three of them are captured and blindfolded. After they're taken somewhere else, their blindfolds are removed, and it is revealed that they were captured by the Kyoshi Warriors of Kyoshi Island.
Wait a second, there's no way a bunch of girls took us down.
A bunch of girls, huh?
They interrogate the three, skeptical of their intentions and alliances, but Aang reveals he is the Avatar, and they quickly become apologetic of their hostility. News of the Avatar's presence on Kyoshi Island travels fast, and soon Zuko and his crew set off to wreak havoc on the island. Katara uses this time to collect food and supplies for their travels, while Sokka challenges the Kyoshi warriors and quickly gets his butt kicked. Realizing that women can also be strong, shocking I know, Sokka begs the head warrior, Suki, to teach him the Kyoshi ways of fighting and battle.
Do I really have to wear this? It feels a little girly.
It's a warrior's uniform.
Aang relishes in the attention from the girls on the island, causing a conflict between him and Katara. Aang goes goes back to the water to try to tame the giant unagi from earlier. However, once the creature shows its true strength and water shooting capabilities, Aang is clearly outmatched. After he is knocked unconscious, Katara runs into the water and saves him with her improving waterbending techniques. She sees Zuko and other Fire Nation soldiers arrive, and when Aang wakes up, they head to the village to protect the island residents. The Kyoshi warriors begin to fend off the soldiers, and Zuko and Aang go head-to-head. When Aang sees the destruction around him, he decides it is time for them to leave to prevent any further damage to the island. Before they escape, Sokka apologizes to Suki for judging women warriors, and Suki gives him a goodbye kiss. The gang escapes on Appa, and as they fly away, Aang awakens the Unagi once more to spray water on the island to put out the flames of the Fire Nation. In The King of Omashu, the group visits the Earth Kingdom city of Omashu, and Aang disguises himself as an old man to prevent anyone from realizing he is the Avatar.
So itchy. How do you live in this stuff?
After making it past the gate guards, the group revels in the sights of the unfamiliar layout, noticing their intricate delivery system that spans over the entire length of the city. Aang remembers an old friend of his from Omashu named Bumi, who taught him to think differently, and used the delivery chutes as a slide instead to go all over the city.
One ride, then we're off to the North Pole. Airbender's honor.
Aang tries to recreate this with Katara and Sokka, but they quickly lose control and cause a lot of destruction. They even completely demolish a poor man's cabbage stand, beginning one of the funniest recurring bits in the series. They're taken into custody by the guards and are brought to the King of Omashu, who seems to have a screw loose.
Off with their heads! One for each head of cabbage!
Silence!
Instead of harshly punishing them, he throws them a feast instead. After everything seems like it will turn out fine, the king forces Aang to reveal himself as the Avatar, and reveals that in order to gain his freedom, he will have to complete 3 challenges the following day.
Let us leave.
Let us leave?
The group is taken to a chamber to stay overnight, and when Aang wakes up, he finds Katara and Sokka have been taken and will only be freed when he completes the challenges. They are given rings made of Jinnamite, a rock known as the Creeping Crystal, which continues to grow by the second. In order to prevent his friends from becoming entirely crystallized, Aang cooperates and begins his first challenge.
It seems I've lost my lunchbox key and I'm hungry.
As he works through these unconventional tasks, he finds that he is most successful when he approaches it from a strategy he wouldn't normally use. After completing the first 2 challenges, his final challenge is to fight the king, who is a very powerful earthbender. As they compete, Aang is tested in ways he isn't used to, but quickly adapts to keep up and hold his own. The king acknowledges this and allows Aang his victory, but requests Aang answer one final question in order to free his friends. Aang is tasked with revealing the name of the king. At first, he's confused on how he would know information that wasn't given to him, but after analyzing the tasks he was given, he realized that only someone who thinks differently would present him with such challenges. Aang excitedly reveals the king to be Bumi, his old friend, and they reunite in a long overdue embrace. Bumi explains that as the Avatar, he will need to be prepared to think differently in order to beat Fire Lord Ozai and to save the world, and to utilize what he learned from the challenges. This group really is the greatest personification of the phrase when your circle is small, but y'all are crazy.
I have a challenge for you.
Next up is Imprisoned. While camping in a forest, the group spots a lone earthbender. When they try to talk to him, he runs away.
He looks dangerous, so we better approach cautiously.
Hello there. I'm Katara.
And they quickly follow him to a village. They realize the village is completely swarming with Fire Nation troops. They find the boy and learn his name is Haru. They speak to him and his mother, and they learn that the Fire Nation has resided in and controlled their village for many years, capturing and imprisoning anyone who dares use their earthbending, and using their coal from the mines to power their giant navy ships.
I'll make sure Appa doesn't eat all your hay.
Haru and Katara go for a walk, and Haru reveals that his father was captured and imprisoned for earthbending many years ago. Katara confides in Haru about the loss of her mother, and they bond over their grief.
The only way I can feel close to my father now is when I practice my bending.
As they're walking, they hear an explosion from a mine and find an old man trapped under rubble. Unable to save him with just their strength, Katara convinces Haru to use his earthbending, and he successfully frees the old man. Later that night, Katara shares what she's learned with Aang and Sokka, and they make a plan to leave the following morning to avoid being spotted by any troops. In the middle of the night, Fire Nation troops show up at Haru's house, led by the old man from the mine who reported Haru for using earthbending, and he is taken away. When Katara wakes up and learns of Haru's capture, she and the others make a plan for her to fake earthbending and to get captured in order to find him.
That lemur, he's earthbending.
You idiot, it's the girl!
After her plan works, she is taken on board a Fire Nation ship and finds Haru and his father, who explains that they can't fight back and that the best thing to do is to survive and wait out the war. Katara tries to inspire the prisoners on board, but is unsuccessful.
Yes, they have taken away your ability to bend, but they can't take away your courage.
Later that night, Sokka and Aang try to get Katara to escape, but she refuses to give up on the prisoners. They make a plan and use Aang's airbending to get the coal from the bottom of the ship to the deck so that the prisoners can use it to earthbend and fight the Fire Nation troops. At first, they are reluctant, but soon they all band together and defeat the ship's warden and all the other troops.
For the Earth Kingdom, attack!
The Earthbenders thank Katara for helping them, and they return home to take back their village. Katara realizes her mother's necklace has fallen off, and Zuko finds it in the destruction that they left. Next is the spirit world. As the gang is flying on Appa, they notice a large destroyed patch of a forest. They land and take a closer look, and realize that the Fire Nation was responsible.
It's the Avatar's job to protect nature, but I don't know how to do my job.
Meanwhile, Zuko urges his uncle Iroh to hurry and reboard their ship to pursue Aang, but Iroh seems to prefer the relaxing hot springs over relentlessly hunting the Avatar. Aang begins to feel inadequate about being the Avatar, afraid that he's failing at his duty to protect nature and people.
Ow! Hey, how is that cheering me up?
Suddenly, an older man approaches them, asking if Aang is the Avatar. Aang confirms that he is, and the man leads them to his village, which is in desperate need of the Avatar's help. They explain that a large black and white spirit named Heibai has been coming at night and taking someone from the village into the spirit world. They reveal that they are particularly worried since the winter solstice draws near and the real world and the spirit world are moving closer and closer. They beg Aang to help them, and although he is unsure, he accepts.
I think you can do it, Aang.
Yeah. We're all gonna get eaten by a spirit monster.
Iroh wakes up from his nap to find Earth Kingdom soldiers have trapped him and intend to take him as a prisoner.
The Dragon of the West, the once great General Iroh.
As night falls on the village, Aang attempts to reason with Heibai, but when the spirit appears, it seems less than interested in him. Sokka tries to help, but is instead taken by Heibai, and Aang chases after them.
Heibai! Over here!
He tries to save Sokka, but he and the spirit seem to disappear out of nowhere. Aang chases after them but loses them around the burned patch of forest. He returns to the village to break the news, but he finds that no one else can see him, and he realizes that he's actually trapped in the spirit world as well.
It's okay, Appa. Don't worry. I'm sure they're on their way back.
Unsure of how to find Sokka or return back to his original state, he cries out for Avatar Roku and is approached by a giant dragon, who Aang discovers to be Roku's animal guide. Meanwhile, Iroh attempts to leave clues behind for Zuko to find. The dragon takes Aang to a temple on an island in the Fire Nation and learns of an impending comet coming towards Earth, and also discovers that on the day of the solstice, he will be able to get in contact with Roku's spirit to learn more about being the Avatar. The dragon brings him back to his body, and he returns to the village and informs Katara that he still has no idea where Sokka is. After an escape attempt, the Earth Kingdom soldiers realize Iroh is too dangerous and attempt to forcefully subdue him, but Zuko finds him just in time, and they fight off the soldiers together. As night falls, Heibai approaches the village again. When Aang touches the angry spirit, he realizes that Hei Bai is actually the distressed spirit of the forest, who's grieving the loss and destruction of its home. Aang reassures the forest spirit that the forest will be reborn, and it transforms into a docile panda and releases all of those who it captured in the spirit world, including Sokka. The villagers thank Aang for helping them and offer them supplies for their ongoing journey.
You could give us some supplies and some money.
Sokka?
What?
Aang tells Katara and Sokka about his vision of the comet and how he can get into contact with Roku. It is revealed that the solstice is the following day, and the gang must think of a way to infiltrate an island on the Fire Nation and get Aang to talk to Roku in barely any time at all. This is a prime example of what happens when you procrastinate. Let this be a lesson to you kids. Don't put off your responsibilities for 100 years, or else you'll find yourself having to contact ancient spirits on a really tight deadline. In Avatar Roku, the group departs in a hurry in order to reach the Crescent Island in the Fire Nation by sundown, so Aang can contact the Avatar Roku.
We got your back.
Soon after their departure, Zuko and Iroh show up to the village to inquire about the Avatar's whereabouts, and they follow them in hot pursuit. As Zuko is gaining on them, the group also notices a blockade of Fire Navy ships, led by Commander Zhao, infesting the waters of Fire Nation territory. After an intense battle, the gang manages to make it into Fire Nation territory. Zuko continues to chase them, and even though he is banished, Zhao allows him to enter the territory with the intention of following him and finding the Avatar himself. The group finally makes it to the Crescent Island as the sun is beginning to set.
Nice flying.
Oh, you must be tired.
However, when they make it inside the temple, they realize they are not alone. The temple is guarded by the Fire Sages, who protect the Temple of the Avatar. Instead of helping Aang, they attempt to capture him to prevent him from contacting Avatar Roku and growing stronger.
Do you know where you're going?
Nope. Wrong way!
The group runs away from them, but gets cornered by one of the Fire Sages. Instead of capturing them, the Fire Sage, Shu, reveals that he is on their side and offers to take them to Roku. As they use a secret way to get to the statue of Roku, Shu explains how the Sage's loyalty used to lie only with the Avatar, but once the war began, they were forced to follow the Fire Lord, though he still had faith in the Avatar.
When I learned you were coming, I knew I would have to betray the other sages.
As Zhao pursues Zuko's ship, Zuko instructs Iroh to continue sailing as he sails away in a smaller ship covered by the thick smoke, and allowing him to escape to the Crescent Island without Zhao following him. As the group makes it to the doors of the room where Roku is, they find that the only way to get in is through firebending.
5 fire blasts, huh? I think I can help you out.
Sokka presents his idea of makeshift explosives, but they are unsuccessful. However, when the other Fire Sages arrive, they see the scorch marks and think that Aang made it inside. They firebend to open the doors, but they just find Momo on the other side. Katara, Sokka, and Shu attack the others in an effort to allow Aang to make it inside, but Aang is grabbed by Zuko. He breaks free from his grasp, and he makes it inside of the room just in time. The door seals itself shut behind him, preventing Zuko and the rest from opening the doors.
Why did you help the Avatar?
Because it was once the sage's duty.
Commander Zhao appears and reveals he didn't fall for Zuko's distraction and followed him into the temple. Katara, Sokka, Shu, and Zuko are chained up as Zhao waits eagerly for Aang to come out of the room so that he can take him to Fire Lord Ozai.
How's Aang gonna make it out of this?
How are we gonna make it out of this?
Aang finally gets in contact with Avatar Roku's spirit, who warns about the comet. He explains that when the war first began, Fire Lord Sozin harnessed the comet's power to become extremely powerful and used it to deal a staggeringly powerful first strike against the other nations. Roku explained that Sozin's comet will return by the end of the summer and that Fire Lord Ozai will use its power to win the war, and urges Aang that he must become powerful enough to defeat Ozai before the comet appears, or else the world will never be free from the Fire Nation. Roku senses the danger Aang is in at the temple and offers to help him. Roku's spirit emerges from the room and his power frees Katara, Sokka, and Zuko from their chains.
Avatar Roku.
As Roku begins to destroy the temple, Zuko escapes, and Zhao and his lackeys begin to flee. Roku's spirit fades, leaving Aang as himself again, and the group frantically attempts to escape the crumbling temple. Appa swoops in and saves them all, and they escape and fly away, and Zuko continues to pursue him on this small ship. You've gotta hand it to Zuko. You could call him a lot of things, but one thing he is not is a quitter.
But Commander, only Shayu helped the Avatar. Save your stories for the Fire Lord.
In the waterbending scroll, Aang worries about his time frame to learn the other elements before the comet, so Katara offers to at least teach him what she already knows about waterbending.
Would you sit down? If we hit a bump, you'll go flying off.
They stop and find a body of water to practice on, and Aang quickly picks up Katara's teaching with ease, though she seems less than thrilled.
Yeah, don't get too happy. You've got to do me next.
After Aang summons a large wave, he accidentally washes away all of their supplies, so they head to a nearby port. As they look around, they stumble across a shady salesman who takes them onto a ship to show them his goods. They find many treasures from all over, and even spot a water tribe scroll that teaches waterbending, though they can't afford the hefty asking price.
Let's say to the price of 1 copper piece.
They realize that the salesmen are actually pirates, and Katara quickly urges them to leave. However, as they're leaving, the pirates chase them, and we even see the Cabbage Man's cart get destroyed again. Rest in peace, his cabbages.
I hope that lemur of yours has 9 lives!
The group returns to their spot from earlier, and Katara reveals that she stole the waterbending scroll. Zuko and Iroh arrive at the trading port so Iroh can replace a missing lotus tile from his game. As they look around, they hear the pirates talk about Aang and Katara, and they team up to find them. Katara is unable to master the new waterbending moves, while Aang picks them up quickly.
There. See? The key to bending is...
Will you please shut your air hole?
Katara lashes out at Aang due to her frustration, but quickly apologizes.
What about Momo? He's the real victim here.
I'm sorry, Momo.
And what about me?
Later that night, Katara continues to try to practice bending, but her frustrated cries leads the pirates to her. She fends one off and frees herself, but is quickly trapped again by Zuko. Katara is interrogated but uncooperative. Zuko bargains with her, promising to return her mother's necklace, which he had found before. He continues to hold onto the scroll until the pirates help him locate Aang.
Oh, what? I'm not good enough to kidnap?
Sokka and Aang are kidnapped by the pirates, but upon learning Aang is the Avatar, they change their mind about their deal with Zuko and turn against him, causing a fight.
Aang, this is all my fault.
No, Katara, it isn't.
Yeah, it kind of is.
Katara, Aang, and Sokka use the commotion to free themselves and escape. They steal the pirates' ship, so the pirates steal Zuko's boat to pursue them.
Bleeding hog monkeys!
The pirates manage to make it onto their ship, and Katara and Aang use their waterbending skills to fight them off. They approach a waterfall and have to jump off of the ship, but Appa catches them just in time. Both the pirate ship and Zuko's boat are destroyed completely.
The lotus tile was in my sleeve the whole time!
Katara apologizes to Aang again for her jealousy, and Sokka reveals that he managed to steal back the waterbending scroll. Disclaimer, stealing is wrong unless the whole fate of the world depends on it. Then it's perfectly reasonable. Next is Jet. After accidentally stumbling into a Fire Nation camp, Aang, Katara, and Sokka are saved by a rogue group of vigilantes led by a young man named Jet.
Hey, he was mine!
Jet takes them to the group's hideout and explains that they fight against those in the Fire Nation. Jet invites Sokka out on a mission, but when the group jumps and robs a seemingly harmless old man from the Fire Nation, Sokka begins to have second thoughts about Jet.
Do you like destroying towns? Do you like destroying families? Do you?
He tries to tell Katara and Aang, but they aren't convinced. Jet begs them to stay, stating that the Fire Nation is planning to burn down the forest that they live in, and asks them to use their waterbending to fill up a reservoir with water. In the middle of the night, Sokka hears commotion outside and sees Jet and his men sneaking off. He follows them, and overhears his true plan of breaking the dam and using the water in the reservoir to flood out Fire Nation troops from a nearby Earth Kingdom town, also killing civilians in the process. They find Sokka eavesdropping and take him away to prevent him from telling Katara and Aang.
Anyhow, he went out on a scouting mission with Pipsqueak and Smellerbee.
Well, I'm glad he cooled off.
After filling up the dam, Katara and Aang go to meet Jet at the reservoir, but see explosives and realize Jet's plan. Meanwhile, Sokka escapes from the others and runs off.
Hey!
Aang tries to fly down to the dam and stop the others, but Jet attacks him and takes his staff in an attempt to prevent him from getting there in time. They fight, and Katara uses her bending to freeze Jet to a tree. They realize it's too late and pray that Sokka possibly was able to get to the dam in time to stop the explosion. However, Jet gives his signal and the dam is blown to pieces, flooding the town below. Katara and Aang watch in horror, realizing they failed. Suddenly, Sokka arrives, exclaiming that he managed to alert the people of the town, saving them all.
The Fire Nation soldiers assumed I was a spy, but one man vouched for me. The old man you attacked.
They leave Jet and apologize to Sokka for doubting him. Young love, it can make you do some crazy things. Next up is the storm. The group is out of food and out of money, so Sokka gets a job with the local fishermen to earn some cash. Tensions rise as a giant storm approaches, and as the fishermen and Sokka prepare to go out to sea, the fisherman recognizes Aang as the Avatar and shames him for disappearing for so long.
You're the Avatar, ain't you?
That's right.
Well, don't be so smiley about it.
Upset by the man's disappointment, Aang runs away, and Katara runs after him. On Zuko's ship, conflict occurs when Zuko wants to continue into the eye of the storm to chase after Aang, while his crew becomes upset about his disregard for anyone else but himself.
Enough!
Katara finds Aang, and he tells her about the day he was told he would become the Avatar, and how usually they would have waited to tell him until he was older, but the impending war forced them to tell Aang when he was still very young. When others learned that Aang was the Avatar, he was treated differently, and everything changed. Monk Gyatso tried to protect Aang's innocence, but the other monks grew wary of his protective nature and feared it would make Aang weak.
You're playing games with him? The Avatar should be training!
They ordered for them to be separated, and for Aang to be sent away to the Eastern Air Temple to complete his Avatar training. Aang reveals that because he was so upset by everything, he decided to run away, but a giant storm caused him and Appa to crash into the ocean, and when he woke up, he was with Katara and Sokka. Aang admits the heavy guilt he feels for running away and turning his back on the world, but Katara assures him that returning when he did was how it was meant to be. On the ship, Iroh overhears the crew complaining about Zuko and his unhealthy obsession with the Avatar. Iroh joins them and reveals why Zuko is the way that he is. He explains that while in a defense meeting with many high-ranking Fire Nation officers, Zuko spoke out of turn, and his father disapproved.
Zuko was right, you see. But it was not his place to speak out.
To test his honor, an Agni Kai was ordered, but when Zuko went to fight, he realized that he would be fighting his father and not the captain he spoke out against. He begged for his father's forgiveness and refused to fight. His father showed no mercy and burned Zuko badly, then banished him for refusing to fight and showing weakness.
I looked away.
Iroh reveals that Ozai will only let Zuko return to the Fire Nation if he brings him the Avatar. The fisherman's wife finds Aang and Katara and worriedly explains that Sokka and the fisherman have not returned, so the two decide to go and look for them.
I'm going to find them.
I'm going with you.
I'm staying here!
They find them and save them from the turbulent waters, but are quickly taken under by a giant wave. Aang activates the Avatar state and saves them all.
I'm too young to die!
I'm not, but I still don't wanna!
Zuko spots them, but instead decides to get his crew to safety instead of risking any more danger. The fisherman thanks Aang for saving his wife, and Aang decides not to dwell on the past anymore. Continuing on, we have the Blue Spirit. Commander Zhao and Colonel Shinu watch Shinu's archers train. Zhao requests use of the archers, but Shinu refuses. Suddenly, a messenger hawk appears, alerting that Zhao has been promoted to admiral, and he demands the archers once more, and Shinu obeys. In the background, we see a figure in a blue mask silently observing. Zuko learns of Zhao's promotion and begins to feel hopeless in the race to find the Avatar first.
I take the part. but you're all improving.
In a cave, Katara and Sokka both fall ill from the storm, so Aang visits an herbalist to find a cure. She instructs him to go to a nearby swamp to fetch some frozen wood frogs that will cure his friends. However, when he's collecting the frogs, the archers pin him down and capture him. They take him to Zhao, who holds him prisoner, and joyfully spreads news of the Avatar's capture to the Fire Nation. The figure with the blue mask appears and frees Aang. Zhao finds Aang's chamber empty and sounds the alarms. Aang and the Blue Spirit fight off the guards who attempt to stop them from escaping, but they eventually get backed into a corner by Zhao and his men. The Spirit threatens to kill Aang, therefore restarting the Avatar reincarnation process. So, Zhao allows them to escape to prevent them losing the Avatar's identity and general location. However, as the pair leaves, Zhao has an archer shoot at the Blue Spirit and knocks him out. Aang sees the Spirit's true identity is Zuko, and instead of leaving him for the guards to capture, he chooses to save him. Aang takes him to a forest where he tells Zuko about a friend he used to have from the Fire Nation before the war began. He questions if the circumstances were different, if he and Zuko would be friends. And Zuko replies in true Fire Nation fashion by attempting to shoot him with flames. Aang leaves, and Zuko is left to reflect. Aang returns to his friends and cures them with some delicious frozen frogsicles.
This is tasty.
In Bato of the Water Tribe, Aang finds a weapon belonging to someone from the Water Tribe. The group searches for more clues and finds a ship that belongs to Sokka and Katara's father's fleet. On Zuko's ship, a bounty hunter named June and her giant creature, Shirshu, destructively search for a stowaway. After successfully finding him due to Shirshu's extremely strong sense of smell and tracking abilities, they leave.
Very impressed.
Sokka and Katara are approached by a familiar man named Bato, who is a friend of their father's. He takes the group to an abbey, where he resides with nuns who take care of him, and also make large quantities of perfumes. They begin to reminisce on Bato's past adventures with their father, and Aang feels left out.
It was your father's idea. He just dragged me along. Well, the hippo did the dragging.
When Bato offers to take them to their father, once he receives the map to his location, Aang leaves. Zuko finds June and demands repayment for the damages inflicted on his ship. He bargains for her to track down Aang, using Katara's necklace in exchange for the damages, but she haggles for a monetary payment, and Iroh agrees. Aang intercepts the map to Sokka and Katara's father, but crumples it up instead of giving it to them. Meanwhile, Zuko and his group continue to creep closer and closer. Aang's guilt starts to consume him as he internally battles his betrayal to Sokka and Katara. Bato takes them ice dodging, where they must work together to steer a ship to safety.
Your position is about trust.
I know that. Why wouldn't I know that?
After successfully steering the ship as a team, they all celebrate, but Aang cannot take his guilt any longer. He reveals that he had the map to their father's location the entire time, shocking Katara and Sokka. They angrily decide to find their father instead of helping Aang get to the North Pole, and they leave with Bato.
Good luck.
Okay, you too.
Aang prepares to leave, and a nun suddenly approaches him, informing him of a woman with a giant monster and a boy with a scar looking for him in the abbey. He realizes that they're using Katara's necklace to track him, and he rushes to help them. Katara and Sokka decide that their duty to help Aang outweighs their desire to see their father, and decides to head back. They're soon cornered and captured by Zuko's group, and they return back to the abbey to find Aang.
So this is your girlfriend. No wonder she left. She's way too pretty for you.
Aang returns to help his friends, and a fierce battle between him and Zuko ensues. June uses her Shirshu to fight Appa and cause more destruction. In the heat of the battle, Aang manages to steal back Katara's necklace from Zuko, and the group devises a plan to escape. The nuns assist in spilling over their perfumes, and Katara uses her waterbending to completely soak the Shirshu in the potent-smelling liquid. Unable to use its abilities any further due to it being completely blinded by the overwhelming smells, the Shirshu begins to flail around and knock Zuko and the others to the ground.
June! No!
Aang and his friends use this opportunity to escape. They make up, and Aang returns Katara's necklace to her.
Uncle,
I didn't see you get hit with the tongue.
In The Deserter, Aang, Katara, and Sokka attend a Fire Nation fire festival in hopes of seeing firebending up close.
Look at this.
Hey, a poster of me!
They wear disguises, but accidentally draw attention to themselves and reveal their true identities. They attempt to escape and are helped by a mysterious man. Appa swoops in to save them, and the man reveals his name to be Che, an ex-Fire Nation soldier who now serves a man named Zhang, a firebender who abandoned the Fire Nation and Lord Ozai. He offers to take them to meet him so Aang can learn firebending. Admiral Zhao arrives at the festival and learns of Aang's disturbance, so he begins to head towards the forest where they escaped.
But other than that, the festival went off without a hitch. No fights?
Upon Aang's arrival, Che admits that Zhang is unhappy and demands that Aang leave. Aang refuses to take no for an answer and approaches Zhang, begging for him to teach him firebending. Zhang refuses, stating that because Aang has not mastered water or earthbending yet, that he is not yet ready to learn. Avatar Roku appears as a vision to Zhang and demands that he teaches Aang firebending, so he finally caves and obeys.
I will teach you.
Really? That's great!
Zhang begins to teach Aang the discipline needed to become a firebender, and Aang frustratingly believes his time is being wasted.
Look at your friend. Is she talking? Even that oaf knows to concentrate on what he's doing.
Hey!
Zhang hears of a disturbance nearby and leaves Aang to practice more small tasks. However, Aang becomes overly ambitious and begins attempting to firebend beyond his capacity. His carelessness causes him to accidentally burn Katara, which makes him realize the severity of the power of fire. Zhang returns and scolds Aang and searches for Katara. He finds her by the water, where they discover that she has healing abilities when she accidentally heals herself. Zhang explains his jealousy towards people who can heal and not destroy, and is interrupted by Zhao and his men.
We're torn apart.
He advises Katara to grab the others and flee so they won't be destroyed by the soldiers' destructive flames. Katara finds Aang, who is consumed by his remorse, and he vows to never firebend again. He explains that Zhang has been captured by Zhao, and Aang runs off to help him. When he arrives, he begins to fight Zhao head-on, and Zhao reveals that Zhang was once his master. They continue to battle, and Aang taunts him, causing Zhao to lose control and haphazardly shoot flames everywhere, destroying all of his ships. Aang realizes that if he lacks control as a firebender, that's what he could become. Katara and Sokka help him escape on Appa, and they realize Zhang and the others have disappeared. Next up is the Northern Air Temple. After hearing a story about airwalkers, the gang heads to the Northern Air Temple in search of surviving airbenders. However, when they arrive, Aang is disappointed to find seemingly normal people who are just using air gliders and other inventions to fly.
What do you think?
A boy named Tio introduces the group to his father, the mechanist responsible for the new renovations to the air temple. Aang rejects this blasphemous behavior, upset that these people are modifying the sacred temple belonging to the airbenders. The mechanist explains that his people are merely Earth Kingdom refugees seeking a better life, and that they found the temple abandoned long ago.
This whole place stinks!
Tio takes Aang to some doors, which resemble the doors to the room of the Avatar statues from the Southern Air Temple. Knowing that airbending is the only thing that can open the doors, Aang refuses in order to preserve at least one aspect of the temple, and Tio understands. Sokka is shown around by the mechanist and is taken to an area where he is informed of a gas leak problem. The mechanist explains that he is unable to pinpoint the leak because its lack of color, odor, or sound, so he is constantly trying to find it before it possibly blows up. Later, Sokka finds a rotten egg in the mechanist's office, and they concoct the plan to fill the underground with eggs so that when a gas leak occurs, they can find it due to the smell. Aang, Katara, and Tio go gliding.
What if I land over
And upon further consideration, Aang decides to open the doors to the untouched room. However, when they go inside the room, they find that it has been used to secretly construct weapons for the Fire Nation. Tio's father shows up and admits that he has been aiding the Fire Nation so that they would leave their people alone. When the War Minister of the Fire Nation shows up to collect the weapons, Aang sends them away, refusing to allow any more aid to the enemy. Fire Nation troops arrive to attack them for their retaliation. So Sokka and the Mechanist run off to attempt to use a war balloon that was crafted for the Fire Nation, and the rest of them try to hold off the troops. Finally, Sokka and the Mechanist arrive on the balloon. Because it bore the Fire Nation insignia, the troops believed it was on their side, but were quickly almost wiped out completely by the balloon. It was not enough to end the fighting, and the remaining soldiers continued to move in on the temple. Suddenly, Sokka smells the rotten eggs, and is able to pinpoint the area of the gas leak. They throw the fire engine overboard and cause a giant explosion, causing the rest of the troops to retreat. As the war balloon comes crashing down, Aang scoops up Sokka and the Mechanist. They all celebrate their victory, and Aang comes to terms with the renovations of the temple.
You were right about air power. As long as we've got the skies, we'll have the Fire Nation on the run.
Unbeknownst to them, the Fire Nation retrieves the mostly intact war balloon, as the minister states that their defeat has just become the gateway to many victories. I don't know about you guys, but I really don't like the sound of that. It would be a shame if it happened to be some sort of cynical foreshadowing. Oh well, let's move on. Next is the Waterbending Master. The group finally arrives at the North Pole and finds the Northern Water Tribe. They are honored at a feast, thrown by Chief Arnook, who also introduces his daughter, Princess Yue, and Sokka is instantly smitten. Sokka uses his dazzling personality to rizz up Princess Yue, and surprisingly, it actually seems to work. What can I say, chicks love nerds. A group of waterbenders perform a routine, and after the dinner, Aang is introduced to Master Pakku, the man in charge of teaching Aang how to become a waterbender. Meanwhile, Zhao realizes that Aang and the others are at the North Pole, so he can learn to master waterbending.
Winter, spring, summer, and fall.
He arrives on Zuko's ship and informs Zuko that he is taking his crew on a large exhibition to the North Pole, leaving Zuko behind so that he can no longer interfere with his plans. While in Zuko's chamber, Zhao notices a set of swords that bear a striking resemblance to the ones belonging to the Blue Spirit, and he implies that he knows that it is Zuko.
He's real, all right. He's a criminal and an enemy of the Fire Nation.
Zhao offers to bring General Iroh along for the mission, but Iroh rejects it, showing his loyalty lies with Zuko. The rest of the crew leave Zhao and Iroh alone on the ship.
The crew wanted me to wish you safe travels.
Good riddance to those traitors.
When Katara and Aang arrive to master Pakku's lesson the following morning, Pakku refuses to teach Katara waterbending because she is a girl. After arguing, Katara decides to attend a lesson on healing instead, since that is what is customary to their culture, and also to follow Aang to get the training he needs. When she arrives at the lesson, a woman recognizes her as a relative of Kana, aka Gran. She comments on Katara's engagement necklace, and Katara explains it belonged to her grandmother, who has passed it down to her mother and then her. The woman explains that Kana had run away from the Northern Water Tribe after she was engaged in an arranged marriage many years ago, and that no one knows why she decided to leave and abandon her fiancé. Sokka continues to try to win the heart of Princess Yue, and they agree to meet together on a bridge later that night.
Great! I'll see you now!
Sorry.
Zhao meets up with the pirates and then hires them to blow up Zuko's ship, which we can assume is also intended to get rid of Zuko for good. Iroh goes out on an evening stroll and leaves Zuko behind, but quickly turns around and runs back when he hears the giant explosion. All he can do is watch as the ship is completely engulfed in flames, unsure if his nephew is even still alive. Sokka and Yue meet on the bridge, but Yue regrets meeting him and leaves suddenly. Sokka returns to Katara and Aang, where they explain that Katara was not allowed to learn waterbending. Suddenly, Sokka has the idea of having Aang teach Katara what he's learned, and the two excitedly rush outside. Aang begins to teach Katara what he learned that day, when he's interrupted suddenly by Master Pakku, who rejects him as a student for going against customs.
That was amazing!
That wasn't me.
The next day, all three of them go before the chief and beg Pakku to take Aang back as a student. Katara is expected to apologize to Pakku in order to earn forgiveness, but Pakku continuously taunts her and angers her to the point where she challenges him to a fight. Pakku brushes her off, but after she hits him with a water whip, he begins to engage in combat with her. Meanwhile, Iroh meets with Zhao and explains how pirates attacked Zuko, and Zhao is pleased that his plan went off without a hitch. Iroh agrees to join Zhao in his mission to honor Zuko. Katara and Pakku continue to fight, and her skills actually deal some damage to her opponent. Pakku deals a blow that knocks Katara's necklace off, and Pakku sees it and recognizes it as the one he carved for Kana many years ago. Iroh leaves Zhao's quarters and passes by a random soldier on Zhao's ship, who takes off his mask to reveal himself as Zuko. Zuko thanks his uncle for helping him infiltrate Zhao's attack, and Iroh tells him to stay hidden until they find the Avatar. Pakku tells Katara about his engagement to her grandmother and her disappearance, and Katara explains that her grandmother still rejects the sexist tradition of the Water Tribe and refuses to let them rule her life. And she realizes that's why she ultimately ran away. When she hears this, Yue runs away in tears, and Sokka follows her. He tells her he understands her hesitations with him since he is just a peasant, but she admits that she has feelings for him but cannot act on them because she's engaged. She apologizes to him and leaves him alone to process everything.
I'll see you around, okay?
The next morning, Aang returns to Pakku to learn more waterbending techniques, and is joined by Katara, who is accepted into the lesson by Pakku. Slowly, a giant fleet of Fire Nation boats led by Zhao approaches the North Pole. Uh-oh, that can't be good. We've arrived at the Siege of the North Part 1, and if you've ever watched anything with a part in the title, you know you're about to be in for an insane ride. The Fire Nation fleet draws closer to the North Pole, and the citizens of the Water Tribe begin to gather together to prepare for battle. Yue and Sokka go together to join everyone else, but Yue tells Sokka that they can no longer be friends or see each other because she's engaged and has feelings for him.
You don't understand. I have duties to my father, to my tribe.
The chief asks for volunteers to come together to be a part of a dangerous mission, and Sokka joins. Aang informs the chief about how he wasn't with the Airbenders when they were attacked, but now he is here to defend against the Fire Nation and won't let history repeat itself. And he flies away to battle the ships. However, once he begins to fight, he sees just how many ships are heading his way and realizes that he may be outmatched. The chief prepares the volunteers to fight and dresses a young man named Han in a Fire Nation soldier uniform and informs the men that they will blend in with the approaching troops. Sokka laughs at the outdated uniform and informs them that they'll stand out if dressed like that. Realizing Sokka would have the most knowledge out of all of them, the chief asks him to share everything he knows about the enemy to Han, who is in charge of leading the men. When Sokka hears the chief refer to Han as his future son-in-law, he realizes that he's working with Yue's pompous fiancé.
I expect nothing less from my future son-in-law.
As the day draws into the night, Iroh advises Zhao to fall back on the attack until the morning, since waterbenders get their power from the moon, and they'll be stronger at night. Zhao mentions that he has a bigger plan for that, but agrees to fall back until the next day. Aang returns to Katara and Yue and explains the sheer amount of ships approaching, unsure of what his next move will be. On the ship, Iroh meets up with Zuko, who is preparing to go to find Aang alone. Iroh warns him to be careful and reminds him that since he lost his own son many years ago, Zuko has been like a son to him. Zuko promises to meet his uncle again once he has the Avatar and heads out on his own.
And put your hood up. Keep your ears warm.
I'll be fine.
While the men prepare to attack, Han brags to Sokka about the perks he'll have once he marries Yue. This angers Sokka, and he attacks Han, and the fight is broken up by the chief, who kicks Sokka off of the mission.
And we'll take out this Admiral Cho in no time.
It's Admiral Zhao!
Zuko begins searching for a way into the Water Tribe from under the water, and manages to find a way in. Yue talks about the spirits of the moon in the ocean, and how they provide power to the waterbenders. The talk about spirits reminds Aang of his time in the spirit world, and gives him the idea to attempt to contact the moon and ocean spirits to help them in the battle. Yue takes him and Katara to the most sacred place in the North Pole, the Spirit Oasis, which is a garden containing a pond with a black and a white koi fish. Sokka begrudgingly sharpens his boomerang and is approached by the chief, who admits to taking Sokka out of the mission to assign him to protect Yue, and Sokka suddenly seems to be in a better mood. Aang attempts to meditate and soon falls into a deep state of focus, slipping into the spirit world.
Trying to cross over into the spirit world, it takes all his concentration.
Suddenly, Zuko appears, and Katara fiercely battles him as Yue runs to get help. Noticing her significant increase in skill, Zuko realizes that she has found a master to properly teach her waterbending. The sun begins to rise, and Zuko manages to overpower Katara, revealing that like waterbenders gain power from the moon, firebenders gain theirs from the sun. He takes Aang's body and runs off just as the Fire Nation begins to resume their attacks.
The Water Tribe can try to resist the inevitable, but their city will fall today.
Sokka and Yue return to Katara, who explain that Aang, whose mind is still in the spirit world, has been taken. Let's continue on with the Siege of the North, Part 2. Fighting against the cruel elements, Zuko seeks shelter in a small crevice with Aang's body. In the spirit world, Aang asks where he can find the moon and ocean spirits, and is redirected by an indifferent and unfriendly spirit.
Go away. You're still here?
He stumbles upon the spirit of Avatar Roku, who informs him that the moon and ocean spirits left the spirit world to join the mortal world long ago, but directs him to a spirit who knows their mortal form and can help him. Roku warns that the spirit, Ko, also known as the Face Stealer, is extremely dangerous and will steal his face if he shows even the slightest bit of emotion. Iroh reminds Zhao that they must quickly fight before the moon rises again, or else the waterbenders will be unbeatable. Zhao reveals that he knows the moon spirit's mortal form and is planning on eliminating it. Iroh strongly disagrees with his plan, but Zhao remains determined. While they discuss, Han attempts to attack them, but is quickly thrown overboard. So what I'm hearing is Yue is single. Hooray!
Admiral Choi! Prepare to meet your fate!
Back in the spirit world, Aang finds the terrifying spirit, Ko, who reveals to Aang that he already has met the mortal bodies of the moon and ocean spirit. Aang realizes that the two koi fish in the pond, which bore striking resemblances to the yin and yang, are the mortal bodies of Tui and La, also meaning push and pull. Aang leaves and finds Roku again, asking how he'll return to the human world. Roku sends an old friend, Heibei, to send him back to his body. Aang's spirit shoots through the air and returns to his body, where he wakes up to find he's been captured by Zuko. Katara, Sokka, and Yue see Aang's spirit fly through the air and track him and Zuko down. Katara deals a devastating blow to Zuko and knocks him unconscious in the snow. They go to leave, but Aang refuses to leave Zuko to die and brings his body with them. Zhao arrives at the spirit oasis and removes the white koi fish from the water, turning the moon a haunting shade of red. Aang and the others return and demand him to stop, and even Iroh joins and threatens Zhao.
Zhao! The Invincible! Get it off!
He places the fish back in the water, then deals a sharp and fiery blow to it. Suddenly, the light of the moon is gone, and Iroh begins attacking the Fire Nation troops in a fit of rage. In the darkness, Zhao escapes quietly. Yue begins to cry, stating that all hope is lost. Aang enters the pond and merges with the ocean spirit, becoming a giant, powerful entity. He sweeps through the kingdom and proceeds to wipe out all of the Fire Nation troops. Zhao sneaks through the streets, but is attacked by Zuko, who he presumed was dead. Zhao admits he tried to have him killed for being the Blue Spirit and a traitor to the Fire Nation, and they begin to fight once more. In the oasis, Iroh notices that Yue has been touched by the moon, and she tells them about how the moon spirits saved her and gave her new life when she was born, and now realizes that her duty is to give it back. She touches the moon spirit's body, and her life flows into it. She falls into Sokka's arms. where he sees that she has died. Her body disappears, and she suddenly appears as an apparition and tells Sokka that she'll always be with him and kisses him goodbye before she floats into the sky and becomes the moon. The following morning, after the battle has come to an end, Baku announces that he will travel to the Southern Water Tribe to help them build and to teach waterbending, passing off the responsibility of teaching Aang waterbending to Katara, who he refers to as Master Katara. The chief tells Sokka of the vision he had when Yue was born, of her giving her life to becoming the moon, knowing eventually it was going to happen.
You must be proud.
So proud. And sad.
Zuko and Iroh leave on a pitiful excuse for a ship, and Iroh states his surprise that Zuko isn't attempting to capture the Avatar. He admits to his uncle that he is exhausted, and Iroh suggests he rests, and he does. In the Fire Nation, Fire Lord Ozai looks down on a girl, who he refers to as Zuko's sister, and assigns her a job to do. Oh, great. Just when I thought one Fire Lord child was bad, they dropped this bomb on us. Well, we can't stay here and worry. So, let's jump into Season 2, shall we? Starting off Season 2 strong is the Avatar State. Aang has a nightmare about himself in the Avatar State, and Katara tries to comfort him. The following morning, the people on the Water Tribe ship say their goodbyes and wish them good luck on their journey to the Earth Kingdom base, where they'll be escorted to Omashu, where Aang can safely learn earthbending.
Sokka, take care, son.
Meanwhile, Iroh relaxes at what appears to be a spa and notices Zuko sulking, and he realizes it's the anniversary of his banishment. On a Fire Nation ship, a girl emerges and is referred to as Princess Azula, Zuko's sister. She approaches the Earth Kingdom to track down Iroh and Zuko. Aang and the others arrive and meet General Fong, who believes Aang is already ready to take on Lord Ozai.
I can't imagine what it feels like to wield such devastating power. It's an awesome responsibility.
He explains his plan to figure out how to trigger Aang to go into the Avatar state instead of wasting time by training him any further. Katara objects to this, but Fong tells Aang to consider it. Azula practices her advanced and powerful firebending technique, which allows her to generate lightning from her fingertips. She continues to strike again and again, striving for perfection.
One hair out of place.
Aang returns to Fong and accepts his offer, and the next day, they attempt to get Aang into the Avatar state. After many unsuccessful tries, they fail to find a way to the Avatar state.
Water, earth, fire, air.
This is just mud.
Azula approaches Iroh and Zuko and excitedly tells them that the Fire Lord has requested their return. Zuko stands in a state of shock, overwhelmed that he can now return home. Azula leaves them, stating they will be returning home the following morning. Iroh grows suspicious of Ozai's sudden change of heart, but Zuko angrily scolds him for even assuming his father would have ill intentions. Aang has another nightmare and jolts awake. He tells Sokka that he's changed his mind and needs to tell General Fong that the deal is off. Aang goes to Fong and explains that the only way for him to be in the Avatar state is for him to be in serious danger. Fong then takes it upon himself to attack Aang in an attempt to trigger the Avatar state once more.
What are you doing?
Iroh and Zuko approach Azula's ship, but Iroh continues to look around uneasily. They begin to board, but one of the troops accidentally refers to them as prisoners. They realize they're being betrayed and begin to fight for their freedom.
We're taking the prisoners home. Your Highness.
General Fong sees his plan isn't working, so he begins to put Katara in danger, which works Aang up so much that he goes into the Avatar state. Fong begins to celebrate, but quickly realizes Aang is much more powerful than he thought.
Let's go!
Azula tries to strike Zuko with her powerful lightning, but Iroh deflects it just in time and pushes her overboard, giving them both an opportunity to escape. As Aang continues to lose control in the Avatar state, Roku appears to him and decides to tell Aang even more information about the state. He explains that when he enters the Avatar state, it is all of Aang's past lives aiding him with power. He also reveals that if Aang is killed while in the Avatar state, the reincarnation cycle will stop and the Avatar will be gone forever.
The glow is the combination of all your past lives.
Aang returns to his body, and Fong rejoices at their success. The group decides to get to Omashu on their own, and they leave General Fong behind.
Anybody got a problem with that?
Azula returns to the spa resort, showing wanted poster with Zuko and Iroh's faces on them, and warns the workers that they will be punished for harboring them. Zuko and Iroh are seen cutting off their hair, starting their new lives together as outsiders. I know it doesn't look like much now, but this decision begins the start of the glow-up of the century. Trust me. Next up is the Cave of Two Lovers. While practicing waterbending, the gang meets a group of traveling nomads.
I'm a nomad.
Hey, me too.
I know. You just said that.
They tell them the tale of the two divided lovers who met in the night through a channel of secret tunnels through the mountains. After a run-in with Fire Nation soldiers, the group decides to follow the nomads through the tunnels to make it to Omashu. Iroh and Zuko struggle to survive on their own and decide to head to the Earth Kingdom to avoid being found by Azula and executed. The head nomad, Chong, informs the group of a curse that envelops the tunnels that only allows those who fully believe in the power of love.
We can make it.
Sokka tries to outsmart the tunnels, but they find that they constantly change and shift, making Sokka's plan completely useless. Iroh and Zuko meet a girl named Song when they pass through a nearby village. Song invites them to dinner at her house, where she tells them about an attack that occurred from the Fire Nation. Iroh and Zuko, both going by pseudo-identities, sit and listen.
All the men were taken away. That was the last time I saw my father.
After some chaos in the cave, the group becomes divided and are forced to continue in their respective groups. Song sees Zuko's scar and tries to touch it, but he rejects her touch. She reveals a burn mark of her own, and Zuko is taken by surprise by her injury.
We're separated, but at least you have us.
The group stumbles upon the Tomb of the Lovers and finds the phrase, "Love is brightest in the dark." Katara suggests that if she and Aang kissed, they could find the way out of the labyrinth. In an attempt to appear nonchalant, Aang accidentally offends Katara and she storms off.
I definitely wouldn't want to kiss you.
Oh, well, I didn't realize it was such a horrible option.
Chong believes that the way out is by playing a love song, and Sokka is driven further into his frustration. Iroh thanks Song and her family for their hospitality. She urges them to stay strong and reminds them that the Avatar has returned. Zuko begins to steal the family's horse creature, much to Iroh's dismay, and they leave together. Katara and Aang's torch burns out, leaving them in total darkness. They go to kiss each other and see a glowing path of crystals begin to glow. Meanwhile, on Sokka's side of the cave, they are attacked by an angry badger mole, who only becomes docile through the sound of the nomads' instruments. Aang and Katara find their way out, followed by Sokka and the others riding the badger moles. The gang departs from their nomad friends and finally make it to Omashu. However, much to their dismay, they find that the Earth Kingdom has fallen under Fire Nation control. Gosh dang it, why does this keep happening? Next is return to Omashu. After arriving in Omashu, Aang is determined to find King Bumi. On Azula's ship, one of her advisors tells her that in order to catch Zuko and Iroh by surprise, she may need to drop the royal procession from traveling with her. Azula agrees, and begins to search for some of her friends to form a smaller, more skilled team of trackers. Back on Omashu, we meet Mai, the daughter of the Fire Nation man who took over Omashu as the governor, aka the dictator. Her and her family spot Aang and the others and engage in combat with them, assuming that they're part of the resistance against her family. The gang falls into a hole and finds themselves rescued by the actual resistance. Azula finds one of her friends from her school days, Ty Lee. However, Ty Lee has taken a different path in life and joined the circus. She initially rejects Azula's offer to join her and says how she enjoys being part of the circus.
Tell me, what is the daughter of a nobleman doing here?
But after Azula sabotages her performance, she decides to change her mind and join Azula. The resistance informs Aang of King Bumi's immediate surrender of the city, which surprises Aang.
I'm going to do nothing.
The group realizes they need to find a way to get all of the people out of the city, and they devise a plan to create a fake plague. After the guards see the sick citizens, they let them out of the city. But once they escape, they realize the baby son of the governor accidentally tagged along. The governor and his wife believed he was kidnapped, so they make a deal to trade King Bumi for their baby back. Azula and Ty Lee arrive in Omashu and meet up with Mai. Azula incites Mai to be part of her team, and she immediately accepts. Azula then takes charge of the city and scolds Mai's father for his lack of control. She promptly renames the city New Ozai in honor of her father and takes control of the trade of King Bumi. When Aang and the others arrive to trade the baby, Mai rejects the offer, which was deemed unfair.
We're trading a 2-year-old for a king. A powerful earthbending king?
Aang begins to fight for Bumi and manages to steal him away. However, Bumi informs Aang of a concept called Jing. There is positive Jing that comes from fighting, negative Jing that comes from running away, and neutral Jing that happens when one does nothing. Bumi explains that he has been waiting for the best moment to strike, building up his neutral Jing, and how in order to continue to do so, he must go back to being a prisoner. He informs Aang to find an earthbending teacher who has mastered the art of neutral Jing, and he returns back to captivity.
Hey, Momo.
Momo's mastered a few jings himself.
Azula informs her friends that in addition to finding Zuko and Iroh, now she would also like to track down the Avatar. Aang returns to the governor's living space that night and returns his child safe and sound and escapes without a word. Guys, is your friend really a friend if she forces you to quit your life as a silly little circus girl to join her in a terroristic reign of terror? Comment down below. Next up is the Blind Bandit. While looking for an earthbending teacher, Katara and Aang find someone passing out flyers to a local earthbending academy, and they decide to give it a try. Aang does not find much success and decides to move on. He overhears two kids talking about an earthbending tournament, and Katara finds out where the secret meeting place is. They arrive and watch the big muscly fighters earthbend.
Hey, front row seats. I wonder why no one else is sitting here.
Guess that's why.
But Aang is unimpressed. Finally, a fighter named the Boulder climbs to the top to challenge the undefeated winner, the Blind Bandit. She arrives and promptly whoops the Boulder's behind. Aang is not only impressed by her earthbending skills, but the way she waits until the right moment to attack, which is exactly what Bumi told him to look for in a teacher. The ringmaster, Jin Fu, offers a cash reward for anyone who can beat the Blind Bandit, and Aang accepts in order to get closer and talk to her.
Boo! No talking!
Don't boo at him!
However, all the Blind Bandit wants to do is fight, and she doesn't listen to Aang's pleas. He accidentally knocks her out of the ring, defeating her and winning the money. She storms off and leaves just as mysteriously as she arrived. The group returns to the Earthbending Academy to inquire more about the Blind Bandit, but find out that she's quite the enigma. However, they hear word of the Bei Fong family, an extremely rich and refined Earth Kingdom family, and decide to pay them a visit. When they arrive, they find the Blind Bandit, whose demeanor is completely different. They try to bargain with her to help teach Aang, but she refuses and calls the guards, and the group runs away. Meanwhile, the Boulder insists that Aang and the Blind Bandit work together to win the money, so they could split it between the two of them, since he didn't see Aang earthbend at all to beat her. Jin Fu becomes enraged, and they plan to get their money back. Aang and the gang show back up to the Beifong estate and meet her mother and father, who are ecstatic to be in the presence of the Avatar. They ask if their daughter, whose real name is Toph, could help teach Aang, but they insist that she's weak and untrained.
Then she must be a great earthbender. Probably good enough to teach someone else. Ow!
Later that night, Toph calls a truce and admits that her fighting and earthbending abilities are a secret she keeps from her family, who thinks she's helpless. Suddenly, Jin Fu and the other fighters arrive and kidnap both Aang and Toph, and they leave a ransom note for her family to find, demanding money for her return.
She must be so scared.
You think you're so tough? Why don't you come up here so I can smack that grin off your face?
Toph's family arrives to get her back, followed by Katara and Sokka. The fighters return Toph, but decide to keep Aang to return to the Fire Nation for a hefty reward. Katara and Sokka beg Toph to help them, and she successfully fights off all of the men and gets Aang back. She apologizes to her family for lying to them about her abilities, and instead of acknowledging her strength, they demand that she is watched constantly and monitored. They tell Aang and the others to leave, and they apologize to Toph and go. Just as they are about to fly away, Toph runs over to them and explains that her father changed his mind, and is allowing her to travel with them so that she can teach Aang, and they all leave together.
I'll take the belt back.
Back at the Beifong estate, Toph's father tells Jin Fu and her earthbending teacher Master Yu that Toph has been kidnapped and offers them a large reward for her capture and return. Next is Zuko alone. After leaving behind Iroh, thinking he would travel better alone, Zuko embarks on his adventure alone and under a fake identity. He ends up in a small Earth Kingdom town, where he defends a young boy named Lee from a group of power-hungry Earth Kingdom soldiers.
Thanks for your contribution. The army appreciates your support.
To thank him, Lee brings Zuko to his home where they feed him and allow him to rest as thanks. In the middle of the night, Zuko wakes up to find Lee playing with his swords, and instead of getting mad, he teaches him how to properly wield them. Lee tells Zuko he reminds him of his older brother, who was taken as a prisoner by the Fire Nation. Throughout the episode, Zuko experiences flashbacks from his past, which reveals his docile nature compared to his animalistic sister Azula.
Azula?
We also learn more about the bond between Zuko and his mother, who nurtured him and cared for him despite his shortcomings. We also learn more about Iroh's attempt at the siege of Ba Sing Se, where he tried to capture the capital of the Earth Kingdom, but failed, and also lost his son.
It means Uncle's a quitter and a loser.
What are you talking about? Uncle's not a quitter.
Ozai attempts to use this as a way to have his father, Fire Lord Azulon, reject Iroh's birthright to the throne, and to make him next in line after his death. Azulon refuses this and angers Ozai.
You dare suggest I betray Iroh, my firstborn?
Later that night, Zuko's mother escapes in secret, and when Zuko awakes, she's nowhere to be found. Azula reveals that their grandfather passed away seemingly randomly in the night, and Ozai is crowned the new Fire Lord, as it was Lord Azulon's dying wish. As you can see, all of that was pretty sus. Back in the present, Zuko begins to leave, but Lee's mother finds him and explains that Lee was taken by Earth Kingdom soldiers, and Zuko promises to get him back. Zuko begins to fight the soldiers, but is knocked back and violently begins to firebend. He reveals his true identity, and everyone becomes afraid of him. Even after he saves Lee, he and his mother reject him, and he realizes that he will never be welcome as the banished son of the Fire Lord. See, I want to feel bad for him, but then I remember he's kind of a jerk and a war criminal, and then it becomes a bit challenging. Continuing on, we have bitter work. Aang excitedly starts his earthbending lessons with Toph, but he quickly realizes that he's not as much of a natural as he thought.
A gentle nudge. I'll try that. Keep your knees high, Twinkle Toes!
He and Toph begin to butt heads, and her aggressive teaching style doesn't make the learning process any easier. Zuko returns to his uncle Iroh, who awakens from being knocked unconscious with a surprise attack from Azula. He attempts to nurture his wounded uncle back to health, and they begin to discuss Azula's lightning bending technique.
I hope I made it the way you like it.
Zuko urges Iroh to help him master it, and Iroh explains that until Zuko lets go of his inner turmoil and shame, he won't be able to master the cold-blooded fire of lightning. While Aang tirelessly tries to progress in his earthbending teaching, Sokka decides to go hunt on his own and accidentally becomes lodged in a deep hole in the ground after unsuccessfully attempting to hunt a baby moose lion. After coming to a stalemate in his training, Aang goes with Katara to practice more waterbending. She reassures him about his progress and reminds him of his excellent waterbending abilities.
Think fast! Excellent.
Iroh gives Zuko a lesson on the other elements and explains that in order to become more powerful, one must learn and understand the techniques of the other benders, and he shows Zuko a technique he made on his own while studying the waterbenders to help him learn how to combat and redirect lightning bending.
But I'm willing to be Sokka the veggies and straight talk fellow. Deal?
As night draws closer, Katara becomes worried about Sokka's absence, and they split up to look for him. Aang finds him stuck in the hole and attempts to free him with earthbending, but is unsuccessful.
Aang! Thank goodness! Have you got any meat?
Suddenly, a giant moose lion appears to take back her baby and becomes increasingly aggressive towards Aang and Sokka. Aang musters enough courage to stand his ground and fight it off, and Toph enters, impressed. After seeing Aang firmly stand his ground, Toph implores him to try earthbending again.
You stood your ground against me. You've got the stuff. But do it!
Suddenly, he is able to successfully move boulders around, and they all celebrate. Toph frees Sokka from the ground, and they all return back to Katara.
I realize.
Hey, Katara, look what I can do!
Zuko begs his uncle to strike him with lightning, but Iroh refuses because of the danger. Zuko storms off and declares he will find his own lightning to practice. He stands alone on a cliff in the middle of a storm, begging and screaming towards the sky to strike him as he sobs in frustration. Dude's got some issues. Next is the library. While visiting a desert oasis, the group meets Professor Zay, the head of anthropology at Ba Sing Se University.
Oh, splendid! Now tell me, what was the primary agricultural product of your people?
They ask him if he has an updated map, hoping to learn more information about the Fire Nation. He shows them his map, but it has nothing about the Fire Nation. But it does show the countless amounts of trips to the desert that Professor Zay has taken. He reveals that he has been looking for the Knowledge Spirit's library, which is hidden and extremely difficult to find. The group decides to tag along with him in hopes of finding out a secret weakness of the Fire Nation.
Sandbenders! Shoo! Away from the bison!
After tirelessly looking through the desert, they manage to find a building that is mostly underground that could possibly be the library. Toph decides to stay outside with Appa as the rest enter the building.
What's up?
Where they encounter the Spirit of Knowledge, Wan Shi Tong, who appears to be a giant owl. He initially refuses to let the group in, but after making them promise not to use the knowledge they take to gain leverage on other humans, he agrees to let them look around. They find the room on the Fire Nation, but see it has been destroyed by firebenders.
The darkest day in Fire Nation history. It's got a date at the top, but it doesn't say anything else.
However, they find a hidden planetarium with a calendar-like machine. Katara tells Sokka to enter the date from a parchment he found that was labeled the Fire Nation's Darkest Day. The date displays a solar eclipse, and they realize that because firebenders get their strength from the sun, that attacking them on a day of an eclipse is a surefire way for them to have the advantage.
The Fire Lord is going down!
Mortals are so predictable.
Wan Shi Tong overhears this and begins to sink the library into the ground in order to prevent humans from using his knowledge for war ever again. The group begins to escape, and Wan Shi Tong pursues them.
Library's sinking! Library's sinking!
Sokka and Aang turn around and go back to the planetarium so that they can find the date of the next solar eclipse.
We just need to check every date before Sozon's comet arrives, because after that...
Meanwhile, Toph attempts to keep the library from sinking from above ground. While she's preoccupied, a group of sandbenders come and steal Appa.
I'm sorry,
Appa.
Aang and Sokka successfully figure out the date of the next solar eclipse, and they all manage to escape, besides Professor Zay, who proclaimed he wanted to remain in the library for eternity. When they emerge back above ground, Aang breaks down into tears when he learns that Appa has been stolen. You know, all of this could have been prevented if at least one of them had a library card. Just saying. Up next is the desert. Now stranded without Appa, the group tries to figure out how to get the information about the solar eclipse to Ba Sing Se. Overcome with emotion, Aang leaves the group to find Appa himself after blaming Toph for not trying hard enough to save him. Meanwhile, Zuko and Iroh are attacked and ambushed by a group from the Fire Nation.
Each one is a different kind of weapon specialist.
After escaping, Iroh takes him and Zuko to the desert oasis to meet an old friend. Throughout the day, Katara, Sokka, and Toph try to find a way out of the desert as they're dying of thirst. Sokka and Momo drink juice from a cactus and begin hallucinating and annoying the others.
Friendly mushroom! Mushy giant friend!
Aang returns back to the group in a horrible mood after not being able to find Appa. Jin Fu and Master Yu arrive at the oasis after tracking Aang and Toph's trail for some time. They notice Zuko and Iroh and realize they're wanted fugitives and decide to try and capture them for their bounty.
Momo, no! You've killed us all!
Iroh finds an old friend, Fong, who welcomes him and creates a distraction when Jin Fu and Master Yu attempt to capture him and Zuko, allowing them to escape. Meanwhile, tensions rise as Aang begins to lash out at everyone else, and Katara tries her best to keep the group together. Toph accidentally stumbles across a lost sand sailor, which belongs to the Sandbenders. They use the vehicle to attempt yet again to escape the desert. Iroh meets Fong at Flow Shop, and they enter a secret room together, shutting Zuko out since he isn't a member of the Order of the White Lotus.
Finally, solid ground.
Upon further exploration, the group accidentally enters a giant buzzard wasp hive. They attempt to fight them off, and end up coming face to face with a group of Sandbenders. After the meeting between Fong and Iroh ends, Iroh reveals that they're going to head to Ba Sing Se as refugees, and they escape quietly just before Jin Fu and Master Yu search the shop. They give up and decide to just go back to tracking down Toph. Aang confronts the Sandbenders, demanding that they tell him where they took Appa. One admits that he traded him with a merchant, and that he's been taken to Ba Sing Se to be sold. Aang crosses into the Avatar state and begins to destroy everything around him. But Katara manages to calm him down as he breaks down into tears. In the city of walls and secrets, the group finally makes it to Ba Sing Se, where they meet with their guide, Ju Di. However, every time they mention the war in meeting with the Earth King, Ju Di just brushes it off and ignores them completely.
Can we see the king now?
Oh no, one doesn't just pop in on the Earth King.
They learn Ba Sing Se is segregated into rings, which determine status and wealth, which rubs them the wrong way. They arrive at their housing accommodation in the upper ring, where Judy reveals that their request for an audience with the Earth King will take a month at minimum to make happen. After she leaves, a neighbor warns them about mentioning the war and to stay away from the Dai Li.
And which of your professors could we ask about the war with the Fire Nation?
Zuko and Iroh also arrive in the city, and Iroh quickly gets them both jobs as tea servers at a local tea shop. We also learn that Jet and his crew have also arrived in Ba Sing Se to start anew, but Jet begins to obsess over Zuko and Iroh and is determined to prove their true identity as firebenders.
This tea is nothing more than hot leaf juice.
When the gang gets news of a party at the palace, they decide it's the perfect opportunity to find and talk to the king. Toph, a well-versed member of high society, decides that she and Katara will dress up to sneak into the party and then find a way to get Sokka and Aang. When they arrive, they are denied entry due to their lack of an invitation, but they tell a man named Long Feng that they need to find their family inside, and he escorts them in. When they try to find a way to get in Sokka and Aang, Long Feng refuses to leave their side until he meets their family. Sokka and Aang manage to sneak in as people working the party, and the four of them end up bumping into Ju Di, who seems absolutely terrified that they're there and tries to usher them out. Aang accidentally reveals that he is the Avatar and begins trying to distract everyone so that the others can find the king.
Greetings, Your Majesty!
They are escorted into a room by the Dai Li, and Long Feng reveals that he is the Grand Secretariat of Ba Sing Se, who's in charge of everything related to war and everyday life in the city. Meanwhile, Jet tries to expose Zuko and Iroh, but is instead taken away and brainwashed by the Dai Li. Long Feng explains that within the walls of Ba Sing Se, they are forbidden to talk about the war or anything else relating to it in order to preserve the culture and order of the city, and threatens Aang with the possibility of being ejected from the city before he can find Appa. He ushers in another lady, who introduces herself as Ju Di to escort the group back to the place they're staying. Am I the only one that feels like the vibes are kinda off? Never mind. I'm probably just being paranoid. There is no war in Ba Sing Se. Next is Lake Laogai. Fed up with having to wait around, the group decides to take matters into their own hands and make posters and flyers of Appa to spread around the city.
I've been working all day on my Appa.
Sokka, the arrow was on Appa's head.
Iroh's tea-making skills earn him his own tea shop in the upper ring, much to Zuko's dismay, as he begins to feel more and more frustrated about his bland day-to-day life. As he goes outside, one of Appa's flyers lands in his hands, and he learns that Aang is in the city.
Mushi, if you stay, I'll make you assistant manager.
When the group returns back to their place, Ju Di arrives. The group questions her disappearance from the previous night, and she cheerfully explains her quick vacation she took to Lake Laogai. She then informs them that putting up unauthorized flyers is forbidden, and Aang angrily states that they'll do whatever they want, before promptly slamming the door in her face.
Yeah, let's break some rules!
Ju Di returns to Long Feng, who expresses his disappointment in her control over Aang and his friends. He invites her to Lake Laogai, and her demeanor changes as she humbly accepts the invitation. In their nice new apartment, Zuko informs his uncle of the Avatar's presence in the city. Iroh urges Zuko to put that in the past and to figure out what he truly wants.
I want my destiny.
What that means is up to you.
The group continues putting up posters in the city, and they decide to split up to cover more ground.
Because you think I can't put up posters on my own?
While Katara works tirelessly, she runs into Jet, and her defenses immediately go up. She pins him to a wall, and he insists that he isn't with his old group anymore and has an honest intention to help them find Appa. The rest of the gang shows up, and Toph, sensing Jet's heartbeat, insists that he's telling the truth. Jet reveals that he knows where Appa is being kept, and the rest of them follow him. They enter an empty building, and Katara immediately begins to think it's a trap, but Toph finds some of Appa's fur, confirming that he was there.
They took that big thing yesterday. Shipped him out to some island.
An old man sweeping the floor reveals that they took him to Whaletail Island, which the group finds out is far, very far. Aang states that to even be able to continue their journey, they must have Appa, and the rest agree.
Was this guy your boyfriend or something?
What? No!
I can tell you're lying.
As they leave, the rest of Jet's posse shows up, and Katara again begins to doubt Jet's honesty, since he told her he was alone. However, Jet earnestly insists that he's been alone for weeks, which conflicts with his friend's claims of his recent arrest. Toph determines that both parties are telling the truth, and Sokka realizes that they both believe what they're saying, which implies that Jet may have been brainwashed into trying to trick them into leaving Ba Sing Se. The group tries to jog his memory of the past by mentioning the Fire Nation, and Jet remembers being taken to a location underneath a body of water called Lake Laogai, which they remember Ju Di mentioning before.
Maybe Katara could kiss him. That should bring something back.
Maybe you should kiss him, Sokka.
Later that night, the Blue Spirit appears and holds a member of the Dai Li hostage, looking for information. The following day, the group heads to Lake Laogai and finds an underground facility. They begin searching around, determined that this is where Appa is being held. The Blue Spirit also lurks in the tunnels underneath and finds the room holding Appa. Long time no see, buddy. Meanwhile, the group is surrounded by Dai Li agents, led by Long Feng. They begin to fight, and Aang and Jet attempt to keep up with Long Feng as he tries to escape. They end up in a separate room, and Long Feng triggers Jet into going into a brainwash state, and he begins to attack Aang. Still in the room holding Appa, Iroh appears, and Zuko reveals himself as the blue spirit to his uncle. Iroh begs Zuko not to continue acting as he has been and jeopardizing their new life, and he questions him again on what he truly wants with his life.
No! If his friends hadn't found you, you would have frozen to death!
Aang manages to snap him out of it, and Jet turns on Long Feng, who deals a strong blow to him with his earthbending, forcefully knocking him to the ground. Long Feng runs away, and the rest of the group manages to enter the room, finding Jet in his critical state. Katara attempts to use her healing on him, and reveals that his injuries are very serious. Jet's group urges the rest of them to continue on without them, and Jet insists that he'll be fine.
There's no time. Just go. We'll take care of him. He's our leader.
As the group leaves, Toph reveals that Jet was lying, and we see his friends begin to cry. They find Appa's empty room, and determine that Long Feng and the Dai Li must have taken him before they were able to get to him first. They emerge above ground and demand that they return Appa, and they begin to fight again. Suddenly, Appa swoops down from the sky, blasting through the Dai Li's earthbending walls, and flings Long Feng into the lake. The group finally reunites with their giant furry companion, and they fly off to find a place to recover from their battle. As they escape, Zuko and Iroh are seen by the lake, where Zuko drops his blue spirit mask into the water, saying goodbye to his life of pursuing the Avatar. Okay, you know what? I'm starting to see some potential here. Now that Zuko is done hunting the Avatar, I'm sure that nothing can go wrong. Up next is the Earth King. As the gang recovers, they decide that they must act immediately and find the Earth King to inform him about the war, which up until this point has been completely kept secret to him. As they approach the palace, they manage to evade attacks from the Dai Li and make it in front of the throne and before the king. They begin to inform him about the war, how Long Feng had been keeping Appa captive, and the Dai Li's brainwashing. But Long Feng insists that they're lying. The king reveals that he must trust his advisor, and the group is restrained. Aang recalls Appa biting Long Feng's leg at the lake, and blows a gust of wind in his direction, revealing a giant bison bite on his legs. After comparing the marking to Appa's teeth, the king determines that the kids are telling the truth and allows them to take him to Lake Laogai to show him proof.
But it doesn't prove this crazy conspiracy theory.
Iroh and Zuko return to their apartment, and Zuko states that he feels ill and collapses. When the group arrives at Lake Laogai, they realize that the Dai Li has used their earthbending to destroy any evidence they left behind. The king begins to doubt the validity of their statements, and they beg to take him to the outer wall of Ba Sing Se to reveal more about the war. After more convincing and an offer to ride on Appa, the king accepts. When they arrive, the king is shocked to see an abandoned vessel belonging to the Fire Nation, proving their attacks and the war. Long Feng arrives and assures the king that what he sees is just a construction project. But the king doubts him and orders Feng to be arrested, and he's taken away.
Looks like Long Feng is long gone!
Yeah, I've been waiting to use that one.
They return to the palace and finally inform him of their plan to invade the Fire Nation on the day of the Black Sun. Initially, the king is wary of providing military support, afraid to leave Ba Sing Se helpless, but he realizes the severity of the war and decides to assist them. The king's generals enter and reveal that after they had gone through Long Feng's office, they had found intercepted messages to Aang, Toph, and a report from the Water Tribe.
Long Feng intercepted our letters from home? That's just sad.
Aang learns of a guru looking for him that wants to teach him how to master the Avatar state. Toph receives a message from her mother, informing her she's in the city, and she excitedly states that it seems like her parents finally understand her. Sokka and Katara read their report, and learn the location of their father and his fleet. They all decide that they must split up, but Katara offers to remain in Ba Sing Se to help the Earth King and his generals plan the attack.
You are the nicest sister
ever!
Zuko's condition continues to worsen, and Iroh explains that because he chose to let the Avatar go, he is going through a spiritual metamorphosis and a battle within himself. The next day, Aang prepares to leave with Sokka. He attempts to reveal his romantic feelings to Katara, but is quickly interrupted by Sokka, who's ready to see his father. As they begin to leave, the Earth King mentions the arrival of the Kyoshi Warriors. Sokka assures the king that the Kyoshi Warriors are good friends of theirs before taking off, and the king promises they'll be received with high honor.
Mwah.
Zuko endures intense nightmares and awakens, terrified. In a prison cell, a Dai Li agent brings Long Feng his meal, and he reveals that the loyalty of the Dai Li still lies with Feng and not the Earth King. Toph arrives to meet her mother, but finds herself in an empty building, where she is quickly captured in a metal trap by Master Yu and Xin Fu, who take her and begin to return back to the Beifong estate.
We got the king on our side, we got Long Feng arrested, and when we get back, Suki's waiting for me.
The Kyoshi warriors arrive before the king, but beneath their battle paint, the faces of Suki and the others are nowhere to be found. But in their place stand Azula, Ty Lee, and Mai. Next is the Guru, the Crossroads of Destiny. Uh-oh, guys, another special title. Something tells me that what's about to happen is probably very important. Zuko, appearing to have made a full recovery, approaches his uncle with a new, kinder attitude, and catches Iroh off guard.
Actually, it smells delicious. I'd love a bowl, Uncle.
As their travel together comes to an end, Aang and Sokka arrive at Chameleon Bay, where Sokka reunites with his father after 2 years. Aang leaves to find the Guru, informing Sokka he'll be back to get him in a week. The king informs the imposter Kyoshi warriors of Feng and his betrayal, and his plan with the Avatar to invade the Fire Nation on the day of the eclipse, which Azula receives with a sly smile. Katara continues to work with the king's council, and is tasked with getting his deal of approval for the invasion plans.
Or we could send in Momo to do some damage.
Sorry.
Aang arrives at the Eastern Air Temple, where he meets Guru Pathik, who reveals his close connection with Monk Gyatso and quickly instructs Aang to drink his mixture of onion banana juice.
Yum, yum.
As Master Yu and Jin Fu continue on their journey to bring Toph home, she begins to focus all of her energy on the metal casing around her.
Let me out of here so I can kick both your butts.
Quit your banging!
In their chambers, Azula reveals her plan to overthrow the Earth King and take Ba Sing Se to her friends. She determines that the power lies with the Dai Li and begins brainstorming her plan to gain control of them. At the Eastern Air Temple, Guru Pathik reveals that in order for Aang to gain control of the Avatar state, he must first unlock his chakras.
What are chakras?
Oh, I see.
Aang reflects on what's blocking his flow of energy and faces his fears, guilt, shame, grief, and dishonesty head-on, successfully opening each chakra with acceptance and reflection on his past. Back at Chameleon Bay, Sokka's father learns of nearby Fire Nation ships, instructing each of the men to prepare for battle, including Sokka, who's overjoyed to be able to fight as a warrior alongside his father. Meanwhile, Zuko celebrates the opening of the Jasmine Dragon, Iroh's very own tea shop. They happily serve tea to their excited customers, who have heard of Iroh's miraculous tea-making skills.
Yes, let's make some tea.
Mai and Ty Lee loudly discuss Azula's plan and their affiliation with the Fire Nation, and are overheard by hidden Dai Li agents who quickly leave to relay the information. Azula reveals herself and commends their acting, and begins to wait patiently for the next phase of her plan. Guru Pathik explains to Aang the interconnection of all people, regardless of what tribe or nation they belong to, and continues by explaining how even the elements are connected, such as metal being just part of the earth. Cut to Toph successfully bending the metal in her container and freeing herself.
Fudge!
Woo! Toph, you rule.
She turns and forces both Master Yu and Jin Fu into the casing, bends it closed, and begins to head back to Ba Sing Se. You know, just after she casually solos every other earthbender on the planet. No big deal.
I'm going to be stuck in here forever with you, aren't I?
In her downtime, Katara goes to visit a new tea shop and quickly dodges out of the sight of both Zuko and Iroh. She hurries to the castle to inform the Earth King of the presence of the Fire Nation's banished prince in Ba Sing Se. Guru Pathik informs Aang of the final chakra he must release, which deals with cosmic energy. When asked to meditate on what earthly attachments Aang has, he is filled with images of Katara. Pathik reveals that in order for Aang to open the final chakra, he must let go of whatever he thought of. Aang becomes combative, finding the idea of letting Katara go completely preposterous.
Now, let all of those attachments go. Let them flow down the river.
Back in Ba Sing Se, Katara runs into Azula, Ty Lee, and Mai. Thinking they're Suki and the others, Katara urges them to inform the king of Zuko and Iroh's presence in the city. As soon as she finishes conveying this information, Katara realizes something isn't right, and Ty Lee quickly paralyzes her.
I think it's time for a family reunion.
As Pathik and Aang continue to go back and forth, Aang has a vision of Katara in trouble. He quickly goes to leave, but Pathik begs him to stay, informing him that if he chooses to leave, his chakra will remain blocked, and he will be unable to control the Avatar state. His pleas fall on deaf ears as Aang flies away on Appa without a second thought. As Sokka prepares to battle with his father, he sees Aang return and realizes that something is wrong and decides to head back to Ba Sing Se with him.
Why do you think I trusted you to look after our tribe when I left?
Azula is restrained and brought to Long Feng in the prison, and she pretends to be confused at why she's been brought to his cell. Feng slyly reveals he knows her true identity and offers her a deal. He proposes the delivery of the Avatar to her if she aids in regaining control of the city, and Azula begins to smile. A messenger arrives at the Jasmine Dragon, inviting Zuko and an elated Iroh to formally serve tea to the king, which brings a smile to Zuko's face. After they close on their deal, Azula returns to her chambers with a knowing grin. As Sokka and Aang hurriedly fly back to Ba Sing Se, they pass Toph, and she joins them.
Need a ride?
Azula begins to establish her authority over the Dai Li, who were designated under her rule by Long Feng. She uses fear and intimidation to drill her position of power into their heads, empowering them with what they refer to as terrifying inspiration.
Nice speech, Azula. It was pretty and poetic, but also scary in a good way.
Zuko and Iroh arrive at the castle, but quickly realize they've been set up when they're surrounded by the Dai Li, and Azula reveals herself. Iroh acts of his nickname the Dragon of the West, and spits fire to create a distraction for him and Zuko's escape. However, Zuko feels conflicted with his feelings to fight back, but Iroh pleads with him to escape with him. Zuko continues to attempt to fight his sister, who shows no interest in combat, and Iroh escapes on his own right as Zuko is arrested by Dai Li agents. Aang, Sokka, and Toph arrive and urgently inform the king of Katara in danger. The king brushes them off, insisting she is safe with Koshi warriors.
If there was any danger at all, Bosco's animal instincts would sense it.
But when they all arrive at their chambers and find it empty, they realize that Katara is truly in danger. Toph senses someone at the door who she refers to as a friend. Iroh enters, and Toph reveals that they had met before in passing, catching the rest of the group off guard. Iroh informs the group of Zuko's capture and begs for their help. Aang determines that Katara must be wherever Zuko is, and agrees to help Iroh.
I met him in the woods once and knocked him down. Then he gave me tea and some very good advice.
May I come in?
They manage to capture and interrogate a Dai Li agent, who reveals that Katara is being kept in the Crystal Catacombs. Zuko is thrown into the catacombs with Katara, who is immediately defensive. She voices her disdain at his obsession with capturing the Avatar no matter who he hurts in the process, and berates him and the Fire Nation for the loss of her mother. Zuko softly reveals that the Fire Nation also took his mother away from him too, and Katara's stance begins to relax.
So that when Aang shows up to help me, you can finally have him in your little Fire Nation clutches.
Iroh and Aang begin to tunnel down to find Katara and Zuko, while Toph and Sokka head to the king to inform him of the plan to overthrow him. As Aang and Iroh travel together, Aang begins to express his troubles with the Avatar state and letting Katara go. Iroh reassures Aang that his decision of choosing love over power and perfection was very wise and perfectly fine.
What's going on here?
Sokka and Toph arrive in time to see the coup beginning to start, and they come face to face with Ty Lee and Mai, who quickly force them to surrender once Azula begins to hold the king hostage.
Yeah, what are you in time for? Cutie.
Suddenly, Long Feng attempts to double-cross Azula by having the Dai Li arrest her. However, they hesitate, and Azula informs Feng that they're unsure of where their loyalties lie, as they're unsure which one of them will be successful in taking the throne. She continues by stating Feng's trickery is no match for her divine right to rule that she was born into. Realizing he stands no chance against Azula's power, Feng accepts defeat, and Azula reigns victorious.
You've beaten me at my own game.
Don't flatter yourself. You were never even a player.
In the catacombs, Katara apologizes to Zuko for misjudging him, explaining that whenever she used to picture the enemy, she pictured his face. Zuko absent-mindedly touches his scar, and Katara immediately begins to explain that his injury was not why she thought of him that way. She offers to heal him with water she's kept in a vial from the spirit oasis from the North Pole. She had been saving it for something very important. Before Zuko can respond, Iroh and Aang break through the walls and they reunite with their respective parties. Zuko sees that his uncle was traveling with Aang and becomes enraged as Iroh urges Katara and Aang to escape.
You are not the man you used to be, Zuko. You are stronger and wiser and freer than you have ever been.
Iroh is suddenly trapped in a cage of crystals, and Azula reveals herself and affirms her shock of Iroh's betrayal to the Fire Nation. She urges Zuko to join her in her glorious victory for the Fire Nation, promising him he'll win back his honor and his father's love as Iroh begs him not to be swayed back into a path of evil, and to remember what he truly wants. Azula quickly leaves to stop Aang and Katara from rejoining their friends. As they begin to fight back and forth, Zuko shows up. Much to Aang and Katara's surprise, he begins to attack them, solidifying his choice to join the fight on his sister's side.
I thought you had changed!
At the palace, Toph metal bends to free herself, Sokka, and the king from their prison cell, and they manage to save the king's bear, Bosco, from the custody of Ty Lee and Mai.
Just take the bear.
The fight underground continues, and Aang and Katara quickly realize that they are greatly outnumbered. Aang realizes he must attempt to awaken the Avatar state, meaning he must completely shut out everyone around him, including Katara. He creates a protective dome around himself out of the crystals that surround him and begins meditating, remembering everything Guru Pathak taught him. His eyes and arrows begin to glow, and the overwhelming power of the Avatar state surrounds everyone in the room. He rises from his enclosure, but before he can fully embody the Avatar state, Azula strikes him strongly in the chest with a bolt of lightning, and he comes crashing down to the ground. Katara catches him and stands helplessly surrounded, unsure of her next moves. Iroh stands strongly in front of her and urges her to go, and promises her he'll hold the rest of them off for as long as he possibly can. She manages to escape with Aang's lifeless body, and once he sees they've made it out, Iroh surrenders himself. The group finds each other and quickly climbs on Appa to make their final escape out of Ba Sing Se. While holding Aang, Katara produces her vial of water from the spirit oasis, thankful that she didn't use it on Zuko prior to his ultimate betrayal. She uses it to heal Aang, and he regains consciousness, and she hugs him tightly. At the palace, Azula relishes in her victory over Ba Sing Se, something her uncle attempted but had failed at in the past. Zuko begins to feel an inner battle with himself yet again, unsure if his decision to side with his sister over his uncle was the right choice. Azula reassures Zuko that he has restored his honor through their victory. As the gang flies off, the king sadly looks back on Ba Sing Se and grimly states that the Earth Kingdom has fallen, as the last place free of the war has now succumbed to Fire Nation rule. Alright, so I might have spoken too fast earlier about Zuko being on the side of justice. This has to be arguably one of the most gruesome betrayals in cinematic history. Okay, I'm being dramatic, but it still hurts pretty bad, okay? I was rooting for you, Zuko. Well, now that we're all so full of cheer and inspiration, I think it's the perfect time to head into the third and final season. We begin Season 3 with The Awakening. Aang awakens from a deep sleep and finds himself on a Fire Nation ship. He begins to panic as he realizes that he's been captured by the enemy. He runs out of the room, accidentally bumping into 2 Fire Nation guards. He attempts to escape, but he trips and sprawls across the deck of the ship. He finds Sokka and Katara's father, Hakoda and Bato, staring back at him, while Katara and Toph excitedly run over to him. He turns around to find the guards chasing him were Pipsqueak and the Duke, Jet's friends. Sokka appears to join in on the reunion right as Aang collapses from his weakness. On another ship, Zuko stares pensively out on the water and is approached by Mai. Zuko relays his thoughts about returning to the Fire Nation after being gone for nearly 3 years. In an effort to ease his worries, Mai kisses him and leaves him alone with his thoughts. Aang questions why they are on a Fire Nation ship and dress haphazardly in random Fire Nation clothes. Katara urges him not to overexert himself and reveals that he's been unconscious for a few weeks. Hakoda approaches, and suddenly, Katara shifts into a cold and aggressive demeanor towards her father. After he leaves, Aang asks her if she and her father are fighting, but Katara denies anything of the sort. She takes Aang to his room to perform a healing session, and Aang experiences vivid flashbacks of the strike from Azula he endured. He realizes that he died, but Katara managed to save him. Azula and Zuko return to the Fire Nation in high regard, as hundreds of onlookers below cheer them on as an announcement regales their victory at Ba Sing Se. The group catches Aang up on everything he missed while he was out. Sokka reveals that after their loss at Ba Sing Se, they were still determined to invade the Fire Nation on the day of the eclipse, so they flew back to Chameleon Bay to find his father and his fleet. The Earth King decided to travel the world, so he disguised himself and set off on a new adventure with Bosco. Not long after that, the area was completely swarming with Fire Nation ships, but instead of trying to take them all down, they worked together to capture one and hijack it as their own. Ever since then, they've been sailing west towards the Fire Nation. Although they are unable to completely overthrow the Fire Nation without the Earth Kingdom's army, Sokka explains that they're still planning on a modified, smaller invasion plan. Since they are practically disguised as Fire Nation troops, they've been unbothered ever since. Sokka excitedly reveals to Aang that the best part of their plan is having him as a secret weapon, since everyone believes that he's dead.
How is that good news? That's terrible.
No, it's great!
However, Aang does not take the news about his death well, but before he can protest, a Fire Nation ship approaches them. They hide, and allow Bato and Hakoda to approach them. The crew from the other ship approaches them and questions why they are off course, stating all ships were ordered to Ba Sing Se. Hakoda and Bato make up a story, but the crew finds inconsistencies and plans to sink their ship. Toph hears their plans and alerts the others, and they begin to engage in combat. Their ship continues to take significant damage, but just as things begin to look bad, a giant sea monster appears and attacks the enemy ship, allowing them to escape safely. At his home, Zuko continues to become lost in his thoughts. Azula approaches him, and Zuko admits his worry about seeing his father for the first time. Azula assures him that there's nothing he should worry about, unless the Avatar happens to miraculously be alive. Zuko remembers Katara's special water with healing abilities that she had offered him back in the Crystal Catacombs, but he strongly insists that there's no way Aang could have survived. Later that night, the rest of the group invites Aang to go into town with them to have dinner, but he rejects their offer. Katara stays behind, and Aang admits the guilt and shame he feels for losing at Ba Sing Se. Katara tries to convince him it wasn't his fault, and he angrily tells her to leave. Zuko finally approaches his father for the first time since he was banished. His father assures him that his actions at Ba Sing Se have restored his honor, and he welcomes him home. He continues to congratulate him, expressing his satisfaction in Zuko's strength in killing the Avatar. When Zuko asks him where he heard that from, Ozai discloses that Azula had told him. Zuko wakes Azula up and demands that she tell him why she told their father that he was responsible for killing the Avatar. Initially, Azula attempts to pass it off as a friendly gesture, but she reveals that if the Avatar happens to somehow be alive, that the blame would fall on Zuko rather than her. Back on the boat, Katara returns to Aang's room, but finds him missing. She runs to tell her father and begins to sob, asking him how Aang could leave them when he knows that they need him. Hakoda begins to question if she was also talking about him as well.
You're talking about me too, aren't you?
How could you leave us, Dad?
And Katara breaks down even more, asking how her father could have abandoned them for so long. Meanwhile, Aang attempts to reach the Fire Nation alone, but becomes caught in a storm. He falls into the water. but is approached by the spirit of Avatar Roku, who tells him not to blame himself, and how he believed Aang still has the power to save everyone. Suddenly, Princess Yue's spirit appears, and she creates waves to gently guide Aang to the shore of an island. The following morning, Sokka, Katara, and Toph find Aang and reunite with him. They explain that they decided to split up with the rest of the Water Tribe until the day of the invasion, so that they can continue traveling with him to complete his training. Toph finds Aang's destroyed glider, and he decides to throw it into the molten lava around them, deciding it's best not to carry it anymore so that no one can find out his true identity. This is kind of like when you go to take a nap for a few minutes and wake up 6 hours later at 3 a.m., but like, 20 times worse. Next is the headband. Zuko awakens in the middle of the night and sneaks off into the dark night. He arrives at a building, but when he's spotted by a guard demanding to know his identity, he walks away without a word. Aang and the rest of the gang hide out in a cave, trying to figure out the best way to go about being in Fire Nation territory. Instead of living like cave people, they decide they should find better clothes to help them fit in so that they can move freely about the Fire Nation. They spot clothes drying outside on a clothesline, and sneakily snatch themselves some new outfits.
Sorry, shoes.
They continue exploring a nearby town. Aang waits outside while the rest of them go inside to eat. He is approached angrily by a group of soldiers who mistake him for a student skipping school due to his uniform. They forcefully drag him to school, where he pretends to be a boy named Kuzan from the Fire Nation colonies in the Earth Kingdom, so his lack of knowledge of Fire Nation customs would come across as less suspicious. After class, a girl named Onji approaches Aang, but her jealous boyfriend Hide quickly attempts to establish his dominance. Aang returns to his cave, where the others demand to know where he went. When he tells them he went to school, Sokka loudly opposes Aang's decision to go back. Aang explains that through attending school, he's learning valuable information, including what Fire Lord Ozai looks like, and other important things that could aid in their invasion, which convinces Sokka to allow him to go back to school the following day. Zuko returns to the building again, and is approached by the same guard. This time, he pins the guard to the wall and instructs him not to speak a word of his presence there to anyone. He enters a room that appears to be a jail cell containing Iroh. Iroh quickly turns away, refusing to face Zuko after his betrayal. Zuko begins to interrogate his uncle, asking him why he decided to betray the Fire Nation, and laments how they both could have returned to their normal life. After being ignored by his uncle, Zuko storms out in a blinding rage. The following day at school, Aang continues to stick out and has trouble adopting the policies of the Fire Nation, where one is expected to put the country above themselves, even if that means sacrificing individuality. Aang's playful personality draws the students in, and after school, he is again approached by Onji. Hide sees this and attempts to fight Aang, but he quickly evades all of Hide's punches. Hide accidentally falls over from the force of his own punch. The headmaster approaches when he sees the commotion and scolds Aang for beating up his star pupil and demands a meeting with his parents after school. Katara and Sokka attend the meeting disguised as his parents.
Young man, as soon as we get home, you're gonna get the punishment of a lifetime.
And after they manage to fool the headmaster, they return back to their cave. Sokka again opposes Aang's return to school the following day, but Aang pleads, adding that this is the first time in his life he's been able to experience stuff that other kids have. He decides that he must throw a dance party to show the other kids some fun, thinking that if maybe they at least got to experience some sort of fun, maybe they would change for the better in the future. While Zuko and Mai attempt to spend some time together, Azula interrupts them. After sending Mai away to complete a mundane task, she manipulates Zuko into revealing that he's been visiting their uncle in prison. She warns him not to visit him anymore, advising that it may look suspicious to others, and that it may cause people to think of Zuko as a traitor again. Ignoring his sister's warning, later that night, Zuko visits his uncle again, this time bringing food as a peace offering. Even with Zuko's attempt at kindness, Iroh still ignores his nephew, and Zuko yet again leaves, full of indignation. Aang's classmates arrive at their cave, and awkwardly stand around. Aang attempts to introduce them to old Fire Nation dances he remembered from many years ago. After much persuasion, the party begins to pick up, and the children of the Fire Nation become unrecognizable as they get to enjoy themselves for the first time in their lives. However, the celebration is short-lived as a group of soldiers and the headmaster, who was tipped off by Hide, arrives to shut it down. They try to catch Aang, who's identifiable by his headband, but in order to create confusion, all of the children put on headbands, thoroughly confusing the soldiers. The gang manages to escape, and they fly off into the night. Katara commends Aang for his efforts and kisses him on the cheek. Zuko meets up with a mysterious man with a strange tattoo of an eye on his forehead. He explains that he has heard of the man's abilities. Zuko then orders him to track down the Avatar and eliminate him. Oh, brother, I see he's still up to his old gimmicks. I know I commended his commitment before, but now it's getting a little creepy. Up next is Sokka's master. After a meteor crashes by a nearby town, and Aang, Katara, and Toph use their bending to prevent disaster, Sokka watches yet again and feels useless to the group.
What should I do?
Keep an eye on Momo.
The following day, he expresses his frustration to Katara, who has the idea to visit a weapons store. After searching through the items, Sokka finds a sword, and the owner of the shop informs them that the sword was crafted by legendary swordsmith Pian Dao, who also just so happened to reside down the street. They decide to visit him to see if he would be able to teach Sokka how to become a strong swordsman. They arrive, and his butler reveals that Sokka must prove his worth to Pian Dao and escorts them to him. Sokka falls to his knees and claims that he is unworthy, but hungry to learn. Impressed by Sokka's humbleness, Pian Dao accepts him as a pupil. Aang, Katara, and Toph depart, and allows Sokka to train on his own. Throughout the day, he continuously approaches Pian Dao's challenges in extremely unconventional ways, but his quirkiness proves to be one of his greatest strengths, and it impresses his master even more. The rest of the group waits for Sokka to return, and notices how empty and boring the gang would be without him.
I don't know. They missed you or something. I didn't care.
Pian Dao and Sokka begin constructing Sokka's personal sword. As they're picking out the materials, Sokka remembers the meteorite from earlier and returns to his friends for help. Together, they manage to move the giant mass to Pian Dao's residence. After spending the night crafting the new sword, Pian Dao presents Sokka with his new blade. Full of guilt, Sokka refuses to accept it and reveals that he lied about everything. He admits he's not from the Fire Nation, but the Water Tribe, and profusely apologizes for lying. Suddenly, Pian Dao attacks him, and he and Sokka engage in combat. Sokka manages to keep up, but is eventually knocked to the ground, where Pian Dao sheaths his sword in resignation. He admits that he knew about Sokka's identity the whole time, and advises him to use a better name if he wants to pass as someone from the Fire Nation. He also reveals that he knew Aang's identity all along as well. He explains that the art of the sword belongs to everyone, not just Fire Nation, and urges Sokka to continue training, reassuring him that he has the potential to be an unstoppable swordsman. As they leave, Pian Dao's butler hands Sokka a small bag from Pian Dao. He opens it to find a lotus tile, similar to the one belonging to Iroh. Meanwhile, Iroh slowly but surely begins to train in secret, as he continues to allow the guards to think that he is slowly losing his sanity. Next is the Avatar and the Fire Lord. In a dream, Aang is visited again by Avatar Roku, who informs him that he must learn about Fire Lord Sozin and how the war began in order to be able to put a stop to it. He tells Aang to visit his old home during the summer solstice, which is now the current day. When the group arrives, they become confused, unable to find Roku's previous home. However, Toph feels the remnants of a village beneath the ash and rubble that covers the island. At the peak of the solstice, Aang begins to meditate to reconnect with Roku. At his home, Zuko is awoken from his sleep by a noise outside of his door. He finds a scroll that he must learn the story of his great-grandfather's demise in order to reveal the truth of his own destiny. The following day, he asks Azula about his grandfather's death, and she reminds him that in school they were taught that he passed due to old age after a very successful life. Later that night, Zuko continues to be consumed by his confusion and frustration. He tosses the scroll onto his table, where it accidentally drapes over his lamp. The heat reveals a secret message, revealing that the secret history lies in the Dragonbone catacombs guarded by the Fire Sages. He sneaks out and creeps into the catacombs, where he finds the last testament of his grandfather, Fire Lord Sozin. Aang and Zuko simultaneously learn about Roku and Sozin's past. It is revealed that long before the war, Prince Sozin and Roku were best friends, and that they even shared the same birthday. On their 16th birthday, Roku was announced as the next Avatar. As he prepared to leave to begin his training, Sozin gifted Roku a royal hair ornament usually worn strictly by royalty. Although Roku was expected to leave behind all worldly possessions, he accepted this gift graciously. Roku went off and began to master the elements, even becoming close friends with a young monk Gyatso when visiting the Southern Air Temple. After many years away, Roku returns to the Fire Nation and meets up with Fire Lord Sozin for the first time in many years. However, their time apart had nothing on their strong bond, and the two continued on exactly where they left off. Roku married his childhood friend, and at the wedding is pulled aside by Sozin, who reveals his plan to expand the Fire Nation empire. However, Roku strongly opposes this idea, insisting that the nations are meant to be separate and thrive in their own unique way, and he shuts down the rest of the conversation. Many years in the future, Roku discovers a part of the Earth Kingdom has been claimed by the Fire Nation, where they established multiple colonies. Roku angrily confronts Sozin, demanding to know why he went against his warnings. Sozin explains his expectation of Roku to side with the Fire Nation first, since that's where his loyalty should lie. Sozin attempts to attack Roku, who fights back and overpowers the Fire Lord with ease. He spares him, and threatens that if Sozin tried something like that again, he would not be so gracious. They remain estranged for years, until one night, when Roku awakens to his island being demolished by an active volcano. He attempts to get everyone in the surrounding village out safely, and stays to battle the volcano alone.
This is amazing, Roku! You're battling a volcano, and you're winning!
However, it proves too powerful for him to take on his own. Sozin sees the eruption from across the sea and arrives to help him just as a second volcano begins to erupt. They combat the flames and magma together, but Roku begins to crumble with exhaustion from the smoke and poisonous gas that surrounds him. He reaches his hand out for help from Sozin, but the Fire Lord realizes that without the Avatar in his way, his plans for expanding his empire could finally come to fruition. Instead of saving his best friend, he leaves him to die, and soon after, he is reincarnated as Aang. Zuko finishes the testament, which ends with Sozin's relentless but failed pursuits to find the greatest threat to the Fire Nation, the Avatar. Unsatisfied with the ending, he storms back to the prison where he interrogates his uncle, accusing him of being the one who left the scroll for him to find, complaining that the testament revealed nothing to him about his own destiny. Iroh reveals that the scroll was not talking about his father's grandfather, Sozin, but his mother's grandfather, who he reveals was Avatar Roku. Iroh continues to explain that because both of them are part of his heritage, his internal struggle between good and evil lies within him, and is the reason he struggles to understand his destiny. Iroh presents him with the hairpiece that belonged to Avatar Roku, and urges Zuko that he has the opportunity to do what is right, and correct all of the wrongs his family has done for the past 100 years.
Do they have bathrooms in the spirit world?
Back on Roku's island, Aang awakens from his meditation and relays everything he learned to his friends. He reflects on what Roku was trying to tell him, and comes to the conclusion that Roku wanted him to know that the people are not inherently good or bad, and that everyone deserves a chance to redeem themselves. Next up is the Puppet Master. While camping in a forest, the gang tells scary water tribe stories by the campfire. Afterwards, Toph insists she hears screaming coming from a mountain nearby, but the others assure her she's just on edge from the stories. Suddenly, they're approached by an old woman named Hama, who offers them a place to stay at her inn nearby. They gather around her table for tea, and Hama explains that people have been disappearing in the forest recently during the full moon, and warns them to be careful. The following day, they visit a market to go shopping. Aang and Sokka brainstorm what people could possibly be disappearing, and they determine it must be another angry spirit like Hey Bae. Hama continues to run errands, but sends the others back to the inn. Sokka reveals his suspicions of Hama, and he begins to search the inn for any incriminating evidence.
Come on!
He finds a room that is almost completely empty except for a lone box. He breaks in, and they begin to attempt to pick the lock on the box.
I'll tell you what's in the box.
Suddenly, Hama appears and offers to open the box for them, and presents a comb that she claims as her prized possession. When the others show their confusion, she reveals that it is her last possession from her home, the Western Water Tribe. Sokka and Katara are shocked to meet someone from their tribe, and they all sheepishly apologize for going through her things. Later that night, Hama prepares a traditional Water Tribe feast, and also reveals that she can waterbend. Katara is in disbelief from meeting a waterbender from her tribe, and Hama explains how she was the last one that remained before the Fire Nation wiped them out completely. She continues to recount how she was stolen from home and spent her days in imprisonment, and how she was the only one who managed to escape. She insists on teaching Katara everything she knows so that she can continue the legacy, and Katara graciously accepts. The following day, Hama imparts her knowledge onto Katara. Aang, Sokka, and Toph go into the village to further investigate the disappearances. They manage to run into a man named Old Man Ding, who supposedly survived an encounter with the spirit. However, when they inquire further, he reveals that there was no spirit, but rather a force that took over him and drew him to the mountains during the full moon. But he managed to escape when the sun began to rise. Toph then realizes that the screaming she heard from the mountains must have been real, and the three of them sprint to find whoever is in trouble. They reach the base of the mountain and break inside it, where they find dozens of people chained up inside. They explain that an old witch controlled them and led them there, and Sokka immediately knows it must have been Hama. Toph urges them to go find her while she frees the remaining people. Under the full moon, Hama reveals the technique she crafted while imprisoned to Katara. She explains that where there is life, there is water, and how she used blood bending to control the guards and freed herself from imprisonment. Katara, unsure of how she feels, explains that she doesn't want to have that kind of power over people, but Hama insists that it's her duty to do whatever it takes to win the war and avenge their people. Katara realizes that Hama is responsible for the missing people, and Hama declares that they deserve to be imprisoned the way that they imprisoned her. After refusing again to learn the technique, Hama begins to use bloodbending on Katara.
You should have learned the technique before you turned against me.
But Katara's strength and skill as a waterbender overpowers Hama. Aang and Sokka arrive, and Hama uses them against Katara, who continues to evade her attacks. However, Hama then uses her bloodbending to get Aang and Sokka to hurt each other, and Katara has no choice but to use bloodbending on Hama. Toph shows up with the freed villagers, and Hama is arrested. As Hama is dragged away, she gleefully taunts Katara with the fact that she is now a bloodbender, whether she likes it or not, and Katara begins to sob. Okay guys, it's finally happening. The day we've all been waiting for, the day of the Black Sun. The day of the invasion has finally arrived, and the gang begins to look over and discuss their plans for the attack. Toph asks Aang if he'll be able to use the Avatar state to defeat Ozai, but he explains that when Azula struck him with lightning and Ba Sing Se, all of his chakras locked, and he is now unable to connect to the cosmic energy he needs. Suddenly, Hakoda's fleet appears, and everyone rushes to greet them. When they arrive, they reveal that they've brought some old friends, including Haru and his father Teo, the Mechanist, and of course, Pipsqueak and the Duke.
Pants are an illusion. And so is death.
Teo presents Aang with a new glider that his father crafted for him, and Aang accepts it graciously. Sokka attempts to relay the invasion plan, but crumbles under the pressure of everyone watching him.
Good morning, everyone!
Hakoda takes over and seamlessly explains the plan to everyone. They learn that when they arrive, they first must get through the gates and to the palace before the eclipse begins. Then they must guard the palace while Aang goes in and defeats the Fire Lord during their small window of opportunity. Then, once that is done, they'll have control of the Fire Nation capital and end the war for good. As they begin to leave, Aang notices Sokka sulking. Sokka admits that he's upset that he fumbled up the explanation of his plan, but Aang reassures him that he'll be able to prove himself on the battlefield. They board the ships and approach the great gates of Azulan, cloaked under a thick cloud covering. However, when they arrive, an alarm begins to sound, and a flaming net covers the entrance. Firebenders manage to infest their ships, but are confused when they find that they are empty. Meanwhile, the invasion team has snuck under the gates in a submarine-like invention, which was thought of by Sokka and constructed by the Mechanist.
We managed to invent a worse way of travel than flying. Helmet?
They resurface one last time to replenish their air before the invasion. Katara and Aang stand off from the group and say goodbye, possibly for the last time. They begin to say more to each other, but both fail to find the right words. Right before Aang takes off on his glider, he grabs Katara and kisses her. He leaves, and she rejoins the group to continue their attack. After masterfully dodging the defenses from the troops, the group successfully makes it into Fire Nation territory. Zuko arrives in Mai's empty room and apologizes as he sets a note down onto her bed. He says goodbye to a picture of his mother and promises her that he's going to do the right thing. As the group continues their attack, Hakoda gets badly injured. Katara attempts to heal him, but the severity of his injury makes it take longer than expected. Sokka decides he will be the one to continue leading the charge, and both Katara and his father tell them how proud they are of him. Sokka rejoins the others and creates a strong formation to help them get past the firebenders and into the palace. Meanwhile, Aang arrives in the capital ahead of everyone else and is surprised to find it completely empty. When he makes his big entrance in the palace, Fire Lord Ozai is nowhere to be found, and Aang yells out in frustration. In part 2, Aang returns to the others who are still fighting on the front lines. He explains that everyone in the city is gone, including the Fire Lord. After debating where he could possibly be, Sokka suggests that he's more than likely close by in a bunker protecting him. Toph suggests searching for it, and her, Aang, and Sokka decide to look, while the others continue the plan as scheduled. They arrive at a volcano, and Toph determines a series of tunnels and a large metal structure lie beneath the surface. They enter and sail past the molten hot magma around them.
We'll have to be fast, but careful.
Until they find a giant metal door, which Toph bends out of the way. They continue on and bump into a Fire Nation man, who immediately reveals the location of the Fire Lord's chamber in an effort to not get absolutely demolished.
Thanks!
They arrive, but inside, instead of fighting Ozai, they come face to face with Azula, who reveals her suspicion she had of the Avatar's death, and that she's known about the invasion for months. Meanwhile, Zuko arrives at his father's real chamber. Ozai questions why he came, and Zuko admits he wants to tell the truth. He reveals to his father that Azula lied about him killing the Avatar, and that Aang is more than likely still alive and is probably the one leading the invasion. Ozai becomes enraged and demands Zuko to leave, but Zuko fires back, demanding his father's attention and threateningly revealing his swords. His father, now unable to firebend since the eclipse has begun, has no choice but to sit and listen. Zuko recounts his banishment, stating that his father should never have battled or banished a child. He also reveals the findings he experienced when he was out in the real world. He tells his father that he believes the Fire Nation created an era of fear which they must stop and replace with an era of kindness and peace. His father laughs at him snidely, remarking that his uncle must have had a great influence on him. Upon hearing this, Zuko embraces the comparison to his uncle, something he would have strongly rejected in the past. Aang, Katara, and Toph fight Azula, who they soon realize is just trying to create a distraction for them to waste their time while the eclipse happens. Azula continues to egg them on, and reveals that her favorite prisoner used to talk about Sokka all of the time, but eventually gave up hope on him rescuing her. Realizing she's talking about Suki, Sokka charges at her in a blinding rage. Toph realizes Azula has a dagger, and she uses her earthbending to pin her to the wall before she can lunge at Sokka. Sokka demands that Azula tell them where she's keeping Suki, but she refuses to cooperate. Zuko continues defending his uncle before his father, proudly stating that Iroh has been a better father to him than Ozai ever has. He reveals his plans to free his uncle from the prison and join the Avatar to defeat him and restore balance in the world. He turns to leave, but his father questions whether he wants to learn what truly happened to his mother. Ozai explains that his father, Fire Lord Azulon, had ordered Ozai to kill his firstborn son, Zuko, after Ozai tried to go behind Iroh's back and rob him of his birthright. Ozai admits that he was going to kill Zuko, but his mother found out, and vowed to protect Zuko no matter what, even at the cost of her own life. she decided to do what Ozai called treasonous things that night and ordered Lord Azulan to be killed. After committing such acts, she was banished for treason and never seen again. The eclipse ends, and Ozai attempts to strike Zuko down with lightning, vowing to kill him this time instead of letting him off with such a gentle punishment like before. Zuko quickly redirects his father's bolt using the technique his uncle had taught him previously, and he escapes quickly. Azula breaks free from her containment and flees, and Sokka angrily realizes he wasted their time by trying to interrogate Azula. The others urge him not to worry, and decide that it's best for them to regroup with everyone else. Zuko arrives at the prison to free his uncle, but finds his cell empty and a discombobulated guard, who reveals that Iroh escaped miraculously on his own, calling him a one-man army. When Aang, Sokka, and Toph return, they begin to strategize their escape, when suddenly, they see the sky filled with airships and battle balloons, similar to the ones the Mechanist had created. They manage to take down the balloons, but the ships continue flying past them. They realize that they're going to destroy their submarines, consequently trapping them there, but they're too late, and their ships are destroyed. Hakoda urges them to escape on Appa, while the adults stay behind as prisoners. They say their final goodbyes.
Bye, son.
Bye, Dad. I'm really proud of you.
And Aang, Katara, Sokka, Toph, Haru, Teo, and the Duke all aboard Appa and head for the Western Air Temple to find a safe place to camp out and plot their next moves. Unknown to them, Zuko begins to follow them in an air balloon. I too like to fly under the radar and sneak up on my friends via giant war balloon. They never see it coming. In the Western Air Temple, the group arrives at the deserted Western Air Temple and marvels at its unique beauty. Zuko pursues them closely on foot, but still remains mindful to keep out of their sight. The Duke, Haru, and Teo look around the temple, with the rest of the group gathered to discuss their game plan. They return to the original plan of continuing Aang's training to master the 4 elements before Sozin's Comet. However, Aang appears less than excited to revisit firebending, and tries to change the conversation. Zuko prepares to approach the group, practicing a big opening speech.
Well, what's your answer?
When he reveals himself, the group immediately prepares to fight him, but he insists that his intentions are good, and states that he would like to teach Aang firebending. He continues to profusely apologize for his past behavior, and accidentally reveals that he had hired a Fire Nation hitman to get rid of them. They reject his apologies and tell him to leave, and he retreats in defeat. After he leaves, Toph defends him, stating he's telling the truth, and scolds them for shooing away the only firebender that's willing to teach Aang. Later that night, Toph attempts to find Zuko. When she finds him, she startles him and he shoots out flames in order to defend himself, but accidentally hits her in the feet. She hurriedly crawls away while Zuko attempts to apologize and reconcile with her. He throws himself to the ground and wonders why he's so bad at being good. The next morning, the others begin to grow worried of Toph's absence when she suddenly appears in a sorry state. She sheepishly explains that she attempted to meet up with Zuko, but he accidentally burned her feet, causing her to lose her abilities to see since she usually relies on them to help her take in her surroundings. Katara begins to heal her, and the others grow even less convinced of Zuko's intentions. Suddenly, the hitman that Zuko has hired previously appears, and prepares to start attacking the group. However, before he can get in a good shot, Zuko approaches him and pleads with him to stop. The hitman doesn't listen, and starts to shoot strong explosions at the group from afar. Sokka hits the hitman in the third eye, which he had been using to shoot them. This causes him to combust. They thank Zuko for trying to protect them.
Thanks, Zuko.
Hey, what about me? I did the boomerang thing.
And they finally accept him as a firebending teacher for Aang. They allow him into their group, but still keep their distance.
Unpack? Lunch soon?
Later, Katara approaches Zuko and threatens to end him if he even thinks about hurting Aang, and Zuko realizes that it's going to take a lot to earn their trust. Continuing on, we have the Firebending Masters. As Zuko begins to teach Aang firebending, he quickly realizes that he's lost his firebending abilities.
That one kind of felt hot.
Don't patronize me! You know what it's supposed to look like!
Later that night, Zuko approaches the group and admits his failure. He wonders out loud if his switching sides could have possibly affected his firebending, and Aang begins to speculate that Zuko's bending used to come from his inner rage, and because he is no longer pursuing the Avatar out of spite, he's become weaker. Toph reveals that Zuko must draw his power from the original source of firebending, like how she learned her skills from the original Earthbenders, the Badger Moles. Zuko explains that the original firebenders were the dragons, but they don't exist anymore, but discloses the existence of a lost civilization called the Sun Warriors. Figuring the ruins of their abandoned temple may hold some valuable information, Aang and Zuko decide to leave the following day to explore. When they arrive, Aang almost immediately sets off a booby trap, but manages to avoid getting impaled. They use an extra amount of caution as they continue searching. They pass a mural depicting dragons and the Sun Warriors, and Zuko admits that when Fire Lord Sozin came into power, he introduced hunting dragons as a sport. He reveals that the last dragon was killed by his uncle Iroh, blaming his family as the reason they're extinct. They continue to explore, and they find a room with statues in strange positions. Aang realizes it's a type of dance, and they do the movements together, which causes a gemstone on a pedestal to reveal itself to them. Thinking it could possibly be of some use to them, Zuko picks it up and immediately sets off another booby trap, trapping both him and Aang in a glue-like substance.
Help! Who are you yelling to?
They are found and captured by the mysterious Sun Warriors, who believe that they're there to steal their treasures. Aang reassures them that they aren't there to steal from them, and he reveals himself as the Avatar. Zuko introduces himself as the ex-prince of the Fire Nation and apologizes for his people's improper use of firebending, and humbly requests that he and Aang are taught the proper way. The warriors reveal that in order to learn, Aang and Zuko must go before Ran and Shaw, the true Firebending Masters, who will read their hearts and determine if they are worthy enough to be taught. They arrive at the lair of the Masters and prepare to be judged.
Chanters!
Suddenly, two large dragons emerge and begin circling them. Aang realizes that they want them to do the dragon dance with them, and Zuko and him execute it flawlessly. They become surrounded by flames of all different colors, and Aang and Zuko are filled with the true knowledge and understanding of firebending. Afterwards, Zuko regains his abilities, and even Aang is able to shoot flames from his palms. They both return to the others and show them what they've learned, but they get made fun of for doing a silly dance, much to Zuko's dismay. Alright guys, we've got another two-parter. In Boiling Rock Part 1, Zuko serves the group tea as they relax and joke around. Sokka asks to speak with Zuko in private. He asks Zuko where prisoners of the Fire Nation would be taken, explaining that their friends from the invasion, including his father, were captured. Zuko tries to avoid the question, insisting that it isn't a good place, but he eventually complies and reveals that they would have been taken to Boiling Rock, a high-security prison that resides in the middle of a volcano. Zuko asks what Sokka is planning to do, but Sokka unconvincingly denies any such plans whatsoever. That night, Sokka attempts to sneak out on Appa, but Zuko is one step ahead of him and catches him. Sokka admits that he's planning to save his father, and Zuko insists on accompanying him. And they leave together, deciding to take the war balloon instead. They arrive at Boiling Rock, but have to make a crash landing, leaving them stranded. They make it inside the prison and disguise themselves as prison guards. Suddenly, they're ordered to join all the other guards as a fight breaks out in the prison yard. A guard relentlessly bullies and abuses a prisoner named Chit Sang. The guard lies, saying that Sang tried to use firebending, which is forbidden, and demands that he's thrown in the cooler. Sokka is ordered to help take him away. Sokka and the guard throw Chit Sang into the cooler, where he's kept in freezing temperatures to prevent firebending.
Can you believe this guy?
Prisoners! Am I right?
Zuko retreats to the lounge for lunch, and begins to ask the other guards questions about Boiling Rock and where they would keep prisoners of war. Zuko reconvenes with Sokka and shares that he learned there are no Water Tribe prisoners being kept there. Sokka breaks down, upset that they traveled all that way for nothing. In the distance, Sokka suddenly spots Suki and determines that they haven't failed completely after all. Sokka enters Suki's cell and reveals his identity to her.
Then maybe you recognize this.
And they reunite with a kiss. A guard tries to enter the cell, and Zuko panics and starts to attack her. Sokka hears the commotion outside and manages to slip out. When the guard sees him, she asks for help, and Sokka has to arrest Zuko. In his cell, Zuko is visited by the warden, who also happens to be Mai's uncle. He explains that he intends to return Zuko to his father and collect his reward in due time. Zuko, Sokka, and Suki meet back up in secret and begin to plot their escape. Sokka proposes his idea of using the cooler as a boat to float across the boiling lake, since it's insulated and intended to keep heat out. Chit Sang appears and overhears their conversation and includes himself in their plan, threatening to tell the warden if they oppose. They begrudgingly accept him and continue plotting. Chit Sang and Zuko stage a fake fight that gets Zuko thrown into the cooler. Sokka arrives to take him back to his cell, and Zuko reveals a pocket full of screws and bolts from dislodging the cooler. They hear guards approaching, and Zuko grabs Sokka and brings him inside. They overhear them talking about a new shipment of prisoners coming in the following morning, including war prisoners. They realize Hakoda may be coming after all, but Sokka debates whether they should risk everyone's freedom on the small chance that his dad may show up. Later that night, they begin to go through with their plan.
This here's my girl and my best buddy. They're coming too.
Fine.
But at the last minute, Sokka decides to stay back. Suki refuses to leave without him, but Chit Sang continues the escape with his girlfriend and his friend. As they're floating away, Chit Sang accidentally touches the boiling water and lets out a loud scream that alerts the guards. The warden orders the prison into lockdown, and the escapees are detained and brought back to shore. Sokka and the others see the new shipment of prisoners arrive, and they wait with anticipation to see if they blew their plan for nothing. Just as all of the new prisoners seem to be accounted for, Hakoda emerges, and Sokka's face fills with relief. Let's continue with part 2. After Hakoda is taken to his cell, Sokka finds him and reveals his identity. Filled with joy, they embrace in a warm hug. Overjoyed that they're reunited, Hakoda reveals that the rest of the invasion group is being kept in a prison near the Fire Nation Palace, including the Kyoshi Warriors. Zuko explains that their leader Suki and Zuko are also in Boiling Rock and are on their side, and they begin to brainstorm a new escape plan together. Chit Sang is taken into a room and interrogated by the warden, but he refuses to rat out the others. Sokka stands outside of Zuko's room and tries to inform Zuko of the new escape plan. 2 other guards arrive and take Zuko away.
Could I just get 10 more seconds to rough him up a bit? Fine.
And Sokka tells him to meet with him in an hour. After fighting through rounds of torture, Chit Sang finally breaks and tells the warden that an imposter guard was responsible for coming up with the idea for the escape plan. Zuko is taken to a room, where he finds Mai. She confronts him about his note and chastises him for breaking her heart. Zuko tries to explain himself, but she further berates him for betraying his country. He firmly stands his ground, explaining that everything he's doing is for the good of the Fire Nation and the rest of the world. Sokka visits Suki's cell and tells her the new escape plan. He explains that first they're gonna start a prison riot to distract the guards. Then they'll escape on the gondola and take the warden hostage so they won't cut the line. Suki seems unsure of the plan, but agrees. As Sokka is leaving her cell, he's taken by the other guards and added to a lineup. The warden brings out Chit Sang and orders him to pick out the imposter. Sokka prepares for the worst, but much to his surprise, Sang points to the guard that bullied him in the prison yard, and the warden and the guards take him away to a room where they interrogate him. However, the warden is interrupted by Azula and Tai Li, and Azula informs him that the man is not an imposter.
Hey, I just got orders. Let the prisoners out into the yard.
But
Sokka tricks a guard into letting all the prisoners out into the yard, and Hakoda attempts to start a riot, but is unsuccessful.
What'd you do that for? That hurt my feelings. Aren't you mad at me?
Sokka is approached by Chit Sang, who tells him his loyalty comes at a price, and invites himself on their second escape. Sokka asks him if he knows how to start a riot, and Sang quickly causes a giant mob of chaos. Zuko runs out of the cell and shuts Mai inside. They exchange emotional eye contact, but Zuko pushes forward and leaves her behind. He meets up with the others in the yard, and Suki manages to capture the warden, and the group heads towards the gondola. Guards attempt to stop them, but they quickly surrender once they see the warden in their possession. They board the gondola, and Zuko breaks the lever so it can't be stopped. Just as they begin to relish in their victory, they spot Azula and Tai Li, who land on the roof of the gondola. Zuko, Suki, and Sokka begin to fight them off, while the guards attempt to find a way to stop them. The warden frees himself from his bonds and shouts to the guards to cut the rope. They begin hacking away, and Azula and Tai Li escape onto an oncoming gondola heading back to the prison. Just as the rope is about to snap, Mai shows up and fights off the guards.
What are you doing?
saving the jerk who dumped me.
She manages to stop them and allows Zuko and the rest of them to escape. Mai is detained by the guards, and Azula demands they leave them alone. She questions why Mai would do such a thing when she knows what the consequences are. Mai defiantly replies that her love for Zuko outweighs her fear of Azula. Filled with anger and disdain, Azula prepares to fight Mai, but she is quickly incapacitated by Ty Lee. They attempt to escape, but are quickly surrounded by guards, and Azula demands that they be thrown somewhere to rot. Now fully outside of Boiling Rock, Zuko spots Azula's airship, and they steal it to escape back to the Western Air Temple. They arrive, and the group excitedly reunites and adds some new additions. Yay! I love when they are all able to come together. Let's not split up anymore, okay guys? Next is the Southern Raiders. As the sun begins to rise, the group is awoken by a surprise attack on the Western Air Temple by Azula and a fleet of airships. As quickly as they reunited, their large group is forced to split up again. Dang it! And Aang, Katara, Sokka, Toph, Suki, and Zuko band together to escape on Appa. However, sensing that the attack is being led by Azula,
Go ahead, I'll hold them off. I think this is a family visit.
Zuko goes to fight her head-on to buy the others some time to escape. They engage in a violent fight, and both end up knocking each other off an airship. Appa swoops by and saves Zuko just in time, and Azula manages to propel herself to safety. The gang finds a safe place to camp out for the night, and everyone, except Katara, honors him with a thankful toast for saving them. Katara storms off, and Zuko follows her. He begs her to trust him like everyone else, and she angrily reminds him that she was the first one of all of them to trust him back in Ba Sing Se, but he betrayed her.
Well, hello.
Zuko approaches Sokka's tent and asks him to tell him what he remembers from the day the Fire Nation killed their mother. Sokka recounts the attack on the Southern Water Tribe and the boats with a flag with the image of a sea raven. Zuko recognizes the description as the symbol of the Southern Raiders and thanks Sokka.
Suki.
The next morning, Katara exits her tent to find Zuko, who states that he waited outside for her all night. He reveals he knows who killed her mother and where they could find them, and offers to help her hunt him down. When they go to borrow Appa, Aang questions where they're going to go, and Katara proclaims she is going to get revenge on the man that killed her mother. Aang and Sokka try to convince her that violence will not make her feel better, and they beg her to choose forgiveness, but she refuses to listen. Later that night, she and Zuko take off on their journey to track down the killer. Zuko informs Katara that they must first find the Fire Navy communication tower, which will have all the current deployments of Fire Nation ships. They arrive, sneak in, and find the coordinates of the Southern Raiders, who are currently stationed at Whaletail Island. They head for the island, and Katara recounts the man she saw in her house with her mother who was responsible for her death. They arrive at the ship and successfully infiltrate it. They find the captain, and Katara uses her bloodbending to hold him captive. However, she soon realizes that he is not the man that killed her mother, and the captain reveals that the man she is looking for, Yon Ra, had retired 4 years prior. They track him down and ambush him. Katara demands he remember who she is. At first, he can't recall anything, but as he stares at her face, he recognizes her face from when she was a child, and the day of the attack of the Water Tribe.
You hurt your mother. Get out of here!
Mom, I'm scared.
He remembers that after Katara is sent away by her mother, he demanded she reveal the identity of the sole surviving waterbender of their tribe. Katara's mother admits it's her, and offers herself up as prisoner. Yon Ra replies that he will not be taking prisoners that day, and kills her instead. Katara reveals that her mother was not the waterbender they were looking for that day, but her. Overwhelmed with the realization of her mother's sacrifice from that day, she angrily goes to kill him with frozen water daggers, but stops them right before they hit him. Yon Ra spinelessly begs for mercy, even offering up his own mother for her to kill instead. Katara explains that for years, she wondered what kind of person could so senselessly kill someone like her mother, and that she understands now that she has come face to face with him. She maliciously calls him pathetic and an empty human being before she and Zuko leave him alone in the rain. They return to the others, and Katara sits by herself, lost in thought. Aang finds her and tells her he's proud of her for forgiving the man. She strongly states that she will never forgive the man, but she has forgiven Zuko, and gives him a big hug. Zuko tells Aang he was right in saying that violence isn't the answer, but questions what Aang will do when he has to face Ozai. The time has finally arrived for Aang to face the Fire Lord and his destiny. Let's begin the epic 4-part series finale, shall we? First is the Phoenix King. After arriving at Ember Island, the group finds shelter in the Fire Lord's empty beach house, thanks to Zuko. Aang and Zuko continue firebending training, while the others lazily lounge around the house. Sokka declares that they should have a beach day instead, and they head down to the beach and enjoy themselves.
Blubbering blob monster?
No, it's Suki!
Except for Zuko, who begins to attack Aang with firebending. He chases Aang all around the house until Aang blows him through the side of the structure with his airbending. The others catch up and scold Zuko for attacking Aang and potentially hurting him, but Zuko berates them back, shaming them for indulging in distractions when Sozin's comet is only a mere 3 days away. Aang tells Zuko that they all decided that he will wait until after the comet to fight Ozai, since he isn't good enough at firebending or earthbending yet. Katara continues, explaining that the whole reason they tried to defeat the Fire Lord before the comet was to stop the war. But when Azula took Ba Sing Se under Fire Nation control, the war had already been won, so they figured nothing worse could happen. Zuko solemnly disagrees, and recounts a war meeting he attended with his father when he had returned home. He tells them that his father is planning on using the power of Sozin's comet to completely wipe out the Earth Kingdom, just like Sozin wiped out the Air Nomads. By getting rid of the Earth Kingdom, Ozai intends to start their nation anew as another part of the Fire Nation, and to crown himself the Emperor of the New World. Aang begins to panic, realizing that he must be prepared to take on Ozai in a mere matter of days, but the others assure him they will help him take down the Fire Lord together. Zuko teaches Aang the lightning redirection technique, and the group begins to practice drills, plotting down every minute detail of their group attack on Ozai. However, once they begin to practice, Aang realizes that he can't take another human life. Later that night, he angrily states that everything he's having to do goes against the teaching of the monks, and he goes to be alone and meditate. As they're sleeping, Aang and Momo awaken to the sound of chanting and see an island appear in the sea. They are drawn to it and leave with each other without telling anyone else.
I knew it! You did have a secret thing with Haru!
When the others wake up the next day, they prepare to leave the house, but realize Aang is missing. They split up and go all over Ember Island, but no one is able to find him.
I'm going with Zuko. What?
Zuko has an idea and takes them all to the Earth Kingdom, where they found June in a rowdy bar. Zuko explains that the bounty hunter and her Shirshu are their best bet at finding him. Meanwhile, Ozai prepares to leave on his journey to destroy the Earth Kingdom. Though he originally invited Azula to join him as his second in command, he orders her to stay in the Fire Nation at the last minute. She becomes angry and defensively shouts that he can't treat her like Zuko. Ozai explains that he's leaving her in charge of the homeland, since she is the only one he trusts with the task, and then makes her the new Fire Lord. Touched at her promotion, Azula questions what her father will do now that he's no longer the Fire Lord.
Fire Lord Ozai is no more.
And he reveals his new title of the Phoenix King, ruler of the New World. Aang wakes up with Momo and tries to explain the strange dream he had the night before, but is shocked to find himself on a mysterious island. Next is the Old Masters. The group approaches June and asks her to help them track Aang's scent.
I see you worked things out with your girlfriend.
I'm not my girlfriend!
However, when they present his glider to the Shirshu, June states that he can't be found because he doesn't exist anymore. Dumbfounded by this information, they ask if he's dead, but June assures them that if he was, they would be able to track him. Zuko realizes that there's only one person who can help them, and presents a sandal that belonged to Iroh. The Shirshu catches its scent, and they all take off after it. They arrive at the compromised outer wall of Ba Sing Se. June departs, and they decide to camp overnight and continue their journey the following day. On the mysterious island, Aang has the idea to tap into his past Avatar lives and ask for guidance with his struggles. However, every Avatar he talks to confirms that he must kill Ozai for the world to be at peace, and Aang continues to struggle to accept his destiny. Back at the wall, the group is awoken when they're surrounded by a ring of fire, but quickly realize they're in the presence of friends when Pakku, Zhang, Pian Dao, and King Bumi present themselves. As they reunite, Pakku informs them that he is married to their grand-grand, making him their new grandfather.
Welcome to the family, Gramp.
You can still just call me Pakku.
The men explain that they were all brought together through their affiliation with the Order of the White Lotus, which is revealed to be a secret society that transcends the division of the 4 nations. They also confirm that Iroh is at their camp, just beyond the other side of the wall, and takes the kids to join him. On the way there, Bumi explains that on the day of the eclipse, he finally decided to strike, and managed to expel all of the Fire Nation soldiers from Omashu, and single-handedly took back his city.
Did you do anything interesting on the day of the eclipse?
When they arrive at the camp, Zuko prepares to see his uncle. Katara tries to comfort him, and assures him that his uncle will forgive him, since he has shown he is truly remorseful of what he did. He enters his uncle's tent and waits for him to wake up from his sleep. The following morning, Iroh awakens and notices Zuko's presence, but doesn't turn to face him. Zuko sobs his apologies and begs for his uncle to forgive him, but is cut off by Iroh enveloping him in a massive hug. His uncle tearfully explains that he was never mad at him, but was heartbroken that Zuko had potentially lost his way. He continues, telling Zuko he is proud that he found his way again on his own, and that he is happy he made it to his camp.
It wasn't that hard, Uncle. You have a pretty strong scent.
Iroh and Zuko join the others, who ask Iroh to defeat the Fire Lord since Aang is missing. However, Iroh states that if he were to defeat Ozai, the world would only see it as senseless violence and a struggle to gain power over another. He reveals that the only way to have a peaceful end to the war is if Aang defeats the Fire Lord and fulfills his destiny. He tells Zuko that once Ozai is defeated, he must take over as the Fire Lord with his pure heart and unquestionable honor in order to restore honor and trust back into the Fire Nation. Zuko realizes he must take down Azula and invites Katara to team up with him. Sokka, Toph, and Suki plan to stop the airship fleet. That way, they'll be close to Aang and will be able to help him defeat the Fire Lord. Iroh shares a vision he had from the past where he conquered Ba Sing Se, but admits after his previous loss and all of the things he learned after, he has realized that his destiny is to win Ba Sing Se back from the Fire Nation with the Order of the White Lotus. They split up and head their separate ways. Back on the mysterious island, Aang notices the surrounding land growing closer. He jumps into the water, inspects the island, and discovers it isn't an island after all, but a giant lion turtle. Aang asks it for guidance, explaining his continuing moral conflicts with his duty as the Avatar and his spiritual beliefs. The lion turtle states, "The true mind can weather all the lies and illusions without being lost. The true heart can tough the poison of hatred without being harmed. Since beginningless time, darkness thrives in the void, but always yields to purifying light," and touches Aang's forehead, creating a dazzling green light. The lion turtle brings him to land, where Aang strongly stands and waits for Ozai to come to him. Ozai begins his journey of destruction as Sozin's comet begins to streak through the sky. Continuing on, we have Into the Inferno. Zuko and Katara head to the Fire Nation on Appa as the comet flies overhead. Sensing Zuko's nervousness, Katara reassures him that they will be able to defeat Azula together, but Zuko replies that he's more worried about Aang. At the palace, Azula begins banishing all of her servants, fully convinced that they are plotting to turn on her, or that they will in the future. Sokka, Toph, and Suki arrive just as the airship fleet begins to take off, and they realize that they are too late to stop them. Somehow, Toph manages to catapult them all onto the nearest airship using her earthbending, and they quickly get rid of the crew and take control, while Sokka increases the ship's speed in an attempt to catch up with Ozai's. The Order of the White Lotus gathers together and begins to invade the city of Ba Sing Se in an effort to take back control from the Fire Nation. Iroh's power surges with the comet, and they begin their invasion. Alone in her chamber, Azula continues to grow more and more distressed and carelessly cuts her hair out of anger. She begins to see a vision of her mother that appears in the mirror. She tells Azula that all her life she used fear to control people, and Azula replies that that fear is the only reliable way to live, stating that even her mother was afraid of her own daughter. Her mother replies that she never feared Azula, only loved her.
No, I love you, Azula. I do.
Azula begins to cry and throws a hairbrush at the mirror, shattering it. She sits alone and begins to sob even more. As Ozai begins to move in on the Earth Kingdom, Sokka and the others realize that they won't catch him in time, and Ozai begins expelling massive flames on the Earth below. Aang uses earthbending to send rocks into the Fire Lord's airship's engine, destroying it and causing it to plummet. Ozai leaps off and meets Aang face to face. Sokka excitedly realizes that Aang has returned and shifts his focus into taking down the rest of the airship fleet from destroying the Earth Kingdom.
How do we do that, Captain Boomerang? I can't see outside of this floating hunk of metal.
They drive their ship through a slew of others, but it takes too much damage and begins to crumble, and Suki becomes separated from them. Unable to do anything to save her, Sokka and Toph continue on without her. Azula's coronation begins, but right as she's officially about to be crowned Fire Lord, Zuko and Katara appear. Zuko announces that he's here to defeat her and take his title as Fire Lord, and Azula challenges him to an Agni Kai, which he accepts. Katara tries to stop him, urging that Azula is only trying to keep them from teaming up on upon her, but Zuko insists on fighting his sister to prevent Katara from being dragged any further into harm. He assures Katara of his choice, mentioning that something feels off about Azula this time, and begins the duel. Ozai and Aang continue to fight, but Aang is unable to overpower Ozai enough to get in a hit. Ozai attempts to strike Aang with a powerful flow of lightning, but Aang begins to redirect it. However, instead of shooting it back at Ozai, he panics and shoots it into the sky. His hesitation makes him crumble to the ground in exhaustion, and Ozai takes the opportunity to strike. Aang dodges, but begins to fall into the water below, barely catching himself in time. As Ozai continues to direct a barrage of attacks towards him, Azula and Zuko continue their Agni Kai. And Azula begins to realize her exhaustion and Zuko's upper hand. After knocking her down, Zuko provokes Azula into using lightning and hoped that he could redirect it and use it to end the duel. However, when Azula shoots out a giant blast of lightning, she aims it at Katara in the sidelines. In an effort to protect Katara, Zuko throws himself in front of the blast without thinking and gets struck directly in the chest and is badly wounded. Katara tries to run to him, but Azula moves in on Katara, filled with bloodlust. Unable to regain his footing, Aang covers himself in an earth shield to protect himself from Ozai, who continues to taunt him and his weakness.
You're weak, just like the rest of your people.
As he relentlessly prepares to kill Aang. Finally, here's Avatar Aang. Ozai continues to release a sea of flames upon Aang's shelter, keeping him cornered. Meanwhile, Sokka instructs Toph to metal bend the rudder of an airship so it will lose control and crash into the others. As the ships begin to crash, a Fire Nation soldier finds them on the roof of the airship and attempts to blast them with fire. They're chased off of the roof and slide off the side of the ship, barely landing on a small platform, and Sokka injures his leg. He holds onto Toph, who's dangling off the edge of the platform. More firebenders appear and surround them. Sokka attempts to fend them off with his boomerang and his sword, but he ends up losing both of them. More soldiers appear, and Sokka tells Toph that they may have reached the end. Suddenly, another airship crashes into them.
How did that happen? Did Boomerang come back?
And Sokka excitedly exclaims that Suki is driving the ship. They free themselves and land on her airship. Ozai manages to completely destroy Aang's shelter, and the blast sent him flying backwards into a rocky wall. Aang slams into a jutting rock right where he was struck by Azula. Suddenly, he re-enters the Avatar state, and is along with all his other past lives. Ozai approaches the pile of rubble that covers Aang, ready to deal the final blow, but begins to effortlessly deflect all of Ozai's advances as he's filled with a power he's never had before. He effortlessly throws Ozai across the vast canyon and unleashes a fiery roar and floats up in a giant sphere of air. He begins to draw power from his environment and soon is bending all of the elements at the same time and begins to fight Ozai, who attempts to run away. Meanwhile, the Order of the White Lotus successfully reclaims Ba Sing Se from Fire Nation rule. At the palace, Azula continues maniacally shooting flames and lightning towards Katara, who is frantically trying to dodge. Katara attempts to get to Zuko, but again is blocked by Azula. While hiding behind a pillar, she finds water under a grate in the ground, along with some loose chains. She lures Azula over the grate, then uses the water to suspend both of them long enough for Katara to move about and chain Azula to the ground. With Azula restrained, Katara goes to Zuko and begins healing him as he weakly utters his thanks. When Azula realizes she's been beaten, she frantically begins shooting flames from her mouth and desperately flailing around until she collapses into a heap and sobs. Ozai continues to evade Aang's attacks. But Aang finally manages to capture him with a waterbending lasso and slams him on top of a rocky pillar, where he uses earthbending to trap Ozai in his place. He goes to deal the finishing blow, but at the last moment, he stops. Unable to kill the Fire Lord, Aang returns to his usual self, and Ozai mocks him for being weak. Aang tells Ozai that he refuses to end the fight that way, and restrains the Fire Lord again, bringing him to his knees. He grabs Ozai's forehead and chest, and recalls the knowledge that the lion turtle bestowed to him. He uses the knowledge to begin bending both him and Ozai's energies. Ozai's inner energy is strong and nearly consumes Aang's, but in a final push of strength, he overpowers Ozai and fills the sky with a powerful blue beam of light. Ozai collapses and is unable to stand as Aang powerfully towers over him. Aang reveals that he's taken away Ozai's ability to firebend, therefore bringing peace to the world without having to take his life. He then begins to waterbend away the surrounding flames in the Earth Kingdom, kingdom, preventing any further destruction. Sokka, Toph, and Suki arrive and congratulate him on his victory while they taunt a helpless Ozai.
Guys who don't win? Leave the nicknames to us, honey.
The next day, Zuko prepares for his coronation, but struggles due to his injury. Mai enters his room and offers to help him. He asks her how she managed to get out of prison, and reveals that she had her uncle pull a few strings. They reunite with a kiss, and Mai firmly tells him to never break up with her again. In the Fire Nation capital, everyone is reunited, and those wrongly imprisoned during the war are set free, including the Kyoshi warriors. However, when Sokka sees Ty Lee in a Kyoshi uniform, he immediately raises his defenses. Suki reassures him that she's been accepted as a warrior. Ty Lee reveals that they all bonded while they were in prison together, and has decided to stay with them from now on. Zuko joins Aang, and they reflect how far they have come within the past year, and what's to come as they begin to rebuild the world together. Together, they go before the crowd, and Zuko officially declares the war over. He continues by sharing his plans of beginning a new era of peace and love with Aang's guidance. He is officially crowned as the new Fire Lord, and everyone cheers. Later, Zuko visits his father in prison and tells him that the best thing he ever did for him was banish him, and how it put him on the right path. Zuko proposes that maybe his father's time in prison could do the same for him. Ozai disdainfully asks why Zuko truly came to him, and Zuko demands his father tell him where his mother is. A while later in Ba Sing Se, the gang joins Iroh in his tea shop, and they relax together. Sokka tries to paint them all together, but everyone critiques his art skills, and rightfully so.
Oh, you think you can do a better job, Momo?
Aang slips outside and takes in the peaceful new life that they all live. Katara joins him, and they share their overwhelming happiness with just the power of their looks. They embrace with a strong hug, and then finally, a loving kiss. That was a lot. I am exhausted. If you've made it all the way to this point, you're pretty much a certified avatar yourself. I hope you enjoyed saving the world. Now you should take some time for yourself and relax. Maybe take a look at some of our other great videos. Thank you so much for turning in and joining us on this crazy adventure. We'll see you next time.